Hello everyone, welcome to What If Issei was betrayed and makes deal with Mephisto to becomes Ghost Rider Part 1. Before we start, please go support the Soul Reaper 301 for writing that awesome fanfic. This is the translated version I made. There will be some wrong he or she calling here because it's translated, so let me clear this. Issei is a male in this story. Prologue. Authors Pav. We see a 5-year-old brown-haired boy crying in a river. This boy is practically alone. There was no one around him to release the pain he felt inside, but then, someone puts a handkerchief near his face, which surprised the boy to look at the man. He was a man between 50 and 56 years old, with blonde hair. He was wearing a dark blue coat, while underneath he had another coat, but this one is dark brown. In his left hand he was holding a cane between silver and transparent with a skull on it. The little boy was surprised to see that man, but he still accepted the handkerchief, wiping away his tears as he said. "Thank you, sir," he said in a grateful tone, returning the handkerchief to the man while he just grabbed it. "You're welcome, kid. May I know your name?" he said, asked in a curious tone, while the kid moved away from him a little. "Don't worry, I won't do anything to you," he said in a confident and reassuring tone. "Issei. My name is Issei Haidu, and you, sir?" said asked with a distrustful tone, the already known Issei. "Mephistopheles. Nice to meet you, Issei. My name is Mephistopheles, but if you want you can call me Mephisto," he said in a friendly tone, looking at the little brown-haired boy. "Mephistopheles. What is a child like you doing, crying in a place like this? You shouldn't be playing with your friends or siblings," he said asked with a somewhat confused tone, seeing that there was no one around him and the only thing that could be heard was the sound of cars passing by. "Issei. It's just that I don't have any friends, Mr. Mephi." He didn't finish speaking because the man interrupted him. "Mephistopheles. Don't call me sir, you can just call me Mephisto," he said in a calm tone and a small friendly smile. "Issei. It's okay, Mephisto-san. And the reason she was crying is because my mother has an illness that is killing her and lately she's been in bed all day. There's no way she'll recover," he said with a sad tone, looking at the river without knowing what to do to help his mother. "Mephistopheles. How do you know that?" he said asked with a curious tone, since no child would have to know about that, and even more so if his father or brothers were hiding it. "Issei. My older sisters talk about it alone, but they don't know that I'm listening to them secretly," he answered Mephisto's question, remembering the times he secretly listened to his sisters. "Mephistopheles. I understand," he said in a somewhat calm tone, looking towards the river causing an uncomfortable silence. "Mephistopheles. Do you want me to heal your mother, Issei?" he said asked with a curious tone, still looking at the river while Issei was incredulous upon hearing that. "Issei. Can you really do that?" he said asked with a surprised, happy tone and full of hope that he could save his mother. "Mephistopheles. Sure, but in exchange I need you to give me and sign something," he said in a somewhat serious tone, looking at the brown-haired boy who hesitated for a few seconds, but. "Issei. What do you want?" he said asked with a distrustful tone, looking at the man. "Mephistopheles. You just have to sign this contract and once you do, your mother will recover from that illness," he said with a firm and confident tone, taking out a kind of parchment rolled into some pointed metal spikes on the outer sides. Mephisto handed the scroll to Issei, who just grabbed it and opened it. When he did so, Mephistopheles had a small smile on his face, but suddenly Issei rolled up the paper and returned it to its sender. "Issei. I'm sorry, Mephisto-san, but I can't do it," he said with a somewhat fearful tone, while bowing. "Mephistopheles. May I know why, Issei?" he said asked with a curious but somewhat serious tone, looking at the child. "Issei. I need to think about it. I need to know if I'll do the right thing in signing that paper," he said, remembering how at the end of the words that were written on the paper, there was a line in which he assumed he would have to sign. "Mephistopheles. Okay, take all the time you need. I'll be here for a week in case you change your mind," he said in a confident tone, grabbing the scroll. "Issei. Goodbye, Mephisto-san," he said with a somewhat sad tone, leaving the place while Mephisto just stood there without saying or doing anything. "Mephistopheles. See you, Issei," he said in a somewhat serious tone, proceeding to watch as the little brown-haired boy was leaving. "Mephistopheles. Let's see if you can bear all this," he said, starting to walk, disappearing out of nowhere in the process. With Issei. Now we can see how the little brown-haired boy was going towards his house. He was thinking about whether or not to accept Mephistopheles' contract, but out of nowhere, Issei was tackled by 3 figures of brown-haired girls, who embarrassedly helped lift little Issei. "Ni-Ice-chan, are you okay?" said asked curiously, a 7-year-old girl with loose brown hair. "Issei. I'm fine, Mocha One-chan," he said with a confident tone, cleaning his clothes a little that got dirty when they fell. "I told you to be careful, Matcha," said this time a girl who looked like Matcha, but she had her hair tied in a ponytail. "Mocha. Huh, you were the one who started running when we barely left school," she said with a pow pointing at the girl who looked like her. Hey, stop fighting, okay said, but this time a girl with light brown hair tied in two pigtails. Issei. Irina-chan is right. Stop fighting Akemi Wani-chan, Mocha Wani-chan said the youngest of the three to his older sisters, of course the brown-haired sisters stopped fighting. Irina-chan she said embarrassedly and blushing, something that Issei's sisters didn't like at all. Issei. Is there a problem Irina-chan? He said asked approaching his friend. Irina. No Ice-kun, there isn't one she said with a confident tone, but still blushing and moving away from the brunette. Issei. That's good he said with a small smile, while Akemi and Mocha looked somewhat annoyed at that. Akemi. By the way, you were very thoughtful when we saw you, is something wrong at Taudo? She said asked holding back her annoyance seeing how Issei was so close to Irina. Issei. Nothing's wrong, I was just thinking about school stuff yes, school she said, using that as an excuse so they would believe her. Irina. But you're not even starting this year Ice-kun, you're starting the next one she said, looking at the boy making him get a little nervous, but that's what she says. Issei. Yes, I know, it's just that so as not to have problems with my grades he said, trying not to seem nervous, but luckily for him that excuse worked. Mocha. Calm down Ai-chan, we will help you with your homework she said hugging her younger brother. Issei. Thanks Wani-chan he said with a smile. After that, the chestnut quartet alone went to their houses. Once Issei's sisters arrived they went to their rooms to put away their backpacks and uniforms, while Issei went to his mother's room to see her. However, when he did so, he saw that his skin was very pale, and it was noticeable that he could barely breathe, and that his body looked very weak. Without a doubt, he only had a few days to live and maybe even weeks, although that only made the brown-haired boy sad to the point that he was going to start crying. Akemi, Mocha, Issei it's time to eat exclaimed his father from the ground floor of the house, to which he chose to go there, as well as his sisters to the dining room where his father had already served them food. Issei. Didn't you have to go to work today, Otu-san? Hi. They gave me the week off, so we can spend time together he said lied, although Akemi and Mocha as well as Issei knew why he said that. Hi. Well, let's eat or else it will get cold he said sitting down and starting to eat while his children said. The three of them. Itadakamasu said the three chestnut trees holding their hands together and then they began to eat what their father cooked. 1 week later plus Issei Pav. A week has passed since I met Mephistopheles-san, during this time Oka-san's health went from stable to critical, Otu-san, with the help of Irina's father, had urgently taken her to a nearby hospital. Already at the hospital, both Otu-san and Mocha and Akemi Wani-chan told me about Aka-san's illness, but before they told me anything I told them that I already knew, which surprised them. Otu-san scolded me a little, but I put it aside to focus on Ka-san. However, after having been in the hospital for several hours, a doctor gave us the report on Aka-san's condition. He said he only had 2 days to live. Current events plus authors Pav. We find ourselves in the streets of the city of Kuo. The sky was dark giving a sign that it is night, but as if that were not enough the city was suffering from a heavy rain, but leaving that aside. We will focus on Issei, who was running being soaked by the rain although he was already wet before. The little brown-haired boy was wearing simple light blue pajamas, heading towards the place where he met Mephistopheles. However on the way down Issei tripped in the mud, falling and slipping towards the river. Of course the boy tried to do everything possible to stop, but nothing worked, so he just closed his eyes, realizing that he fell into the river. However, the little brown-haired boy wasn't drowning or anything like that, which disconcerted him, opening his eyes, realizing that he hadn't fallen into the river, so he looked above him seeing how someone was holding him by his pajamas. That person, without wasting any time, lifted Issei with great force and put him on his feet on the riverbank, being none other than Mephistopheles. Issei. Mephistopheles he said with a surprised tone, seeing the man he met a week ago in the middle of the night in the rain. Mephistopheles. Hello Issei, how have you been? He said asked in a friendly tone, covering himself from the rain with an umbrella. Issei. I want to do it he said looking at the man, which made Mephisto give a small smile. Mephistopheles. What do Issei do? He said asked in a somewhat mocking tone, making the boy angry, but he calmed down. Making the boy angry. Issei. I will sign that contract as long as you cure and save my mother, he exclaimed with a serious tone, rare in a child while he looked at Mephisto, hoping that he would save his mother. Mephistopheles. Are you sure? Once you sign it, there will be no turning back, Issei he said in a serious tone, staring at the boy. Issei. I am. Mephistopheles. Well, here you go he said taking out and giving that scroll to Issei, who just grabbed it. Holding it in his hands again, Issei opened it, seeing that it was still the same words as when he opened it for the first time, although not knowing what they said he only focused his sight on the line where he had to sign. So the brown-haired boy looked at Mephisto, who was covering him with his umbrella, so that he and the contract wouldn't get wet. Issei. What do I sign with? Mephistopheles. You have to sign on that line with your blood, Issei, he said in a somewhat serious tone, to which Issei returned his gaze to the scroll. But suddenly, Issei put his right palm on one of the spikes of the scroll, and without thinking, he cut his palm, causing a lot of blood to come out, and in order not to waste it, he quickly spread it along the line, making Mephistopheles much more than satisfied. Mephistopheles. That's more than enough, Issei, he said with a somewhat happy tone, along with a smile full of satisfaction, looking at how some parts of the paper had the child's blood, but there was more blood on the line. Issei. Is that all? He said asked with a somewhat serious tone, enduring the pain he felt from cutting his palm. Mephistopheles. That's right, but remember this, Issei, no matter how much you run, no matter where you go, no matter where you hide, I will always know where you are so that you fulfill the deal, Issei, she said with a serious tone, extending her hand towards Issei, who looked at her to just shake it with his right hand. Issei. Good. Mephistopheles. Okay, it's time for you to go, he said, making his eyes start to glow a fiery orange. Change of scene. Right now we are in the Haidu residence, although we will concentrate on Issei's room, in which we can see the aforementioned waking up suddenly being very agitated, beginning to touch his face as well as his pajamas. Issei. What happened? Last night I remember making the contract with Mephistopheles and he couldn't finish thinking, since the door to his room opened abruptly, revealing his father and sisters. Issei, come on, get up, he said very happily, while Mocha and Akemi were still half asleep. Issei. What's wrong, Otu-san? He said asked, forgetting what happened, thinking it was all a dream. Hi. They just called me from the hospital and told me that your mother has fully recovered, there is no risk of death, he said with great joy, while Mocha and Akemi stopped sleeping and looked at their father. Issei. Seriously, he said incredulously, not believing what his father said. Hi. That's right, come on, get dressed quickly and brush your teeth, in the meantime I'll start the car, he said, leaving the younger brown-haired boy's room. Without wasting any time, Issei and his sisters hurriedly got dressed, of course their father helped them in the middle of the course, after that the three brothers brushed their teeth and got into their father's car, who just started driving towards the hospital, unable to hide his happiness and excitement just like his children. By the time they got to the hospital, luckily for them they were able to go into the room where his wife mother was, who looked better than before. She wasn't exactly recovered, but she was enough to realize that she wasn't in any danger of dying. The children could not bear it and went to their mother, climbed onto the stretcher and hugged her in tears. She also gladly accepted her children's hug and began to cry. Later. Doctor. Well, Mrs. Haidu, let me tell you that the disease you had is no longer there, it disappeared. There is no risk of death or that it will come back, he said with a confident tone, checking some papers, making the Haidu happy. Hi. Are you serious, doctor? He said asked with a happy tone, but being distrustful. Doctor? Yes, but she will stay here until she fully recovers and to do some tests so that everything is in order. Hi. Okay, doctor, thank you very much, he said in a grateful tone, extending his hand towards the doctor who simply shook it. Doctor? I just did my job, he said and then left the room. Mocha? We were very sad that something happened to you, Oka-san, she said hugging her mother, not wanting to let go of her for anything. Akemi? Yes, we even went to church with Irina so you could recover, she said, also hugging her mother. Haru? Calm down, girls, I'm fine now and I promise that we will spend a lot of time together, she said while kissing her daughter's foreheads, but then she turned her gaze towards a certain brown-haired boy. Haru? Is something wrong, Ice-chan? He said asked with a confused tone, looking at his third and last son. Issei. No, Oka-san, no, Pa, he couldn't finish speaking, because he noticed a somewhat large scar on the palm of his right hand. Mephistopheles. No matter how much you run, no matter where you go, no matter where you hide, I will always know where you are so that you fulfill the deal, Issei, said the voice of Mephistopheles behind him, but this voice was a thick and dark voice, making Issei feel an unpleasant chill, in addition to having goosebumps on his skin. Haru? Ice-chan, are you okay? She said asked worriedly, seeing how pale and scared his face was, confusing everyone. Issei. Yes, Oka-san, I am, he said with a smile, obviously that smile was fake, making no one believe him. Issei's pav. At that moment I thought that everything would be fine, but it was not so. 2 years later, Irina went abroad for a job that was offered to her father, who accepted the job. We could not hold back our tears when she left, but before she left, she and I made a promise to each other that we would get married when we grew up if we ever met again. But for some reason Akemi and Mocha One-chan seemed to be really bothered by that, but leaving that aside, months after Irina left our parents had started several arguments which were almost daily, all because Otu-sen had started leaving work too late and even came home drunk. But a year after that, Oka-san discovered that Otu-san was being unfaithful to her. The way he found out was through several pieces of evidence. One of them was the smell of women's perfume on almost all of his work suits, the messages he received on his cell phone, and as if that were not enough, she had seen him going out with a girl of only 20 years old. Of course that day there was a big argument. We heard our parents screaming from our rooms. We also managed to hear how Oka-san had thrown all of Otu-san's things out into the street. After that day, Oka-san changed dramatically. She ignored me and avoided me, as if I didn't exist. I was sad about that, but even so I had to put that aside and learn to fend for myself. The years passed and Oka-san continued to ignore me. I no longer cared about that, but it hurt me a little that my own mother ignored me, but things went from bad to worse. My older sisters, whom I saw as an example to follow, they started to bother me at school. They and other kids would humiliate me or make fun of me. When I saw that, I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I felt alone. Otu-san was nowhere to be seen. Oka-san ignored me, and my sisters only made fun of my bad luck. But I was able to carry that weight. I had to get used to those taunts and humiliations, since I couldn't do anything, and if I did, the one who would have problems would be me, since no one at school supported me. But one time I got in touch with Otu-san. The first time we met, he had changed radically. He told me that he didn't drink anymore, and that he went to rehab every day. He stopped having that relationship with that girl, and as if that weren't enough, he told me that he wanted to get back with Oka-san. At first we saw each other once or twice a week. He would take me to the arcade or somewhere to eat. I would even go with him to rehab where I met the friends he had made. It didn't matter where we went, I was happy as long as I was with my Otu-san. Until one day, when I went to the place where I was supposed to meet him, I ran into a man in a suit and carrying a briefcase. Flashback plus author Pav. We see an Issei of about 11 years old. He was approaching a man in a suit to sit in the chair in front of the man. The man only looked at Issei, who had only taken a deep breath and then said, "Issei. Excuse me sir, but that place is where my father sits," said brown-haired while the man looked at him and said so. "Man. Are you Haidu Issei?" he said, asked with a serious voice but loaded with sadness and pity. Issei. "That's right, how do you know that?" "Kanam. I am your father's lawyer, my name is Kanam Matasaka." "Wait a moment," he said, placing the briefcase he was carrying on the table and then opening it. On Kanam's part, he was looking for something while Issei was confused, but after a few seconds Kanam took out a paper which he gave to Issei. "Issei. What is this?" he said, asked curiously and confusedly, looking at the paper. "Kanam. It's the inheritance that your father left you. I'm very sorry for your loss, young Issei." Then flashback plus back to Issei's Pav. Hearing those words, I had frozen, still, not even breathing. Well, my heart was beating very fast, and I tried to tell myself that it was all a lie, a simple joke, but even so, I turned my sight to my father's inheritance paper. Once I read it completely. He said that he was leaving his income, meaning the money in his bank account, as well as the things he had in the apartment where he lived, in my care, but what he entrusted me with the most was his motorcycle, which was a Yamaha XSR 900. It was certainly strange to have a motorcycle of that brand and type here in Japan, but I still left it at Otu-san's apartment along with her things. With the money she left me, I was able to buy some new clothes and school supplies. After that, the years kept passing. Mrs. Haru kept ignoring me, and I also had to put up with Akemi and Mocha's teasing. But when I was able to enter the Kuo Academy, an academy that used to be only for girls, but is now co-ed. But back to what I was saying, when I entered the Kuo Academy, in the first week they called me a pervert, all because Akemi and Mocha made up stories that I was spying on them when they were showering, or that they saw me spying on the girls from the kendo and sports clubs. You don't have to be smart to know that after that, the entire academy turned against me. Of course I didn't care since I knew how to control years of mockery and humiliation, and what they did to me at the Kuo Academy was not a small portion of what I went through as a child. But one day, I found out about the supernatural world through Akemi and Mocha, who also told Oka-san. They both told us everything about the world that we didn't know. They told us about the sacred gears, the war that there was between the three factions, etc. They also told us that they both belonged to the nobility of two pure-blooded and high-class demons, these being none other than Rias Gremory, the president of the occult club, and heir to the Gremory clan, one of the 72 pillars of Solomon, and Sona Shitoria rather Sitri, heir to the Sitri clan, being this also one of the 72 pillars of Solomon. And as if that were not enough, they are carriers of sacred gears. Akemi had the boosted gear, a Longinus-type sacred gear in which the soul of the celestial dragon of domination, Drag the Welsh dragon, lives, and Mocha had a sacred gear that allows her to create weapons with a material she touches. For example, if she touches iron she can create a sword, axe or spear of iron, and so on with whatever she touches. At that moment I knew I had to get away from them as soon as possible. I didn't approach them, I didn't talk to them, I even moved to my father's apartment, but that was of no use, and I got into the supernatural world anyway. At first I asked the heirs of the Grimory and Citri clans to train me in magic, since I did not have a sacred gear. Of course they did, they explained to me the basics of magic and everything else. On my first attempt I had failed, but on the second I managed to create a magic circle. I had no idea how I did it, but after several attempts, I began to make them with a little more ease, but not for long due to my low magic reserves. Of course Akeno Himejima and Tsubaki Shinra, both queen pieces of Rias and Sona, were quite surprised by that, but a week and a half later, I was already doing low and medium level spells, although for some reason, they stopped training me so I started training on my own. Of course I didn't know how to train, so at first I did physical exercises, I started training in hand-to-hand combat, getting involved in street fights and more, but I knew that with it I wouldn't achieve much, so. Without anyone knowing or noticing, I managed to borrow some magic books from Butchu and Kaichu. Of course getting them was not easy, and returning them was not either, but it was worth it, since with the information I got I could become stronger. Days, weeks, and even months passed, but in these months, I had several adventures, including buying time for the Kakabial cadre not to destroy the city of Kuo, the faction meeting in which the hacker Yuku ended up declaring that he was a descendant of the original Mao Lucifer, etc., etc. But me being human and without having a sacred gear, everyone called me useless for their supposed mind of not having done anything. I was able to calm the leader of the Yakase in her Kyubi state. I created a seal much better than that of the biblical god himself to seal the beast of the apocalypse. I did many important things, and they tell me that I have done nothing. The supernatural world says that humans are ambitious, envious, treacherous, deceitful, depraved, lustful, selfish and many other things, but what they don't know is that if humans do something wrong, we do what is necessary to redeem ourselves from what we have done. I know very well that not all humans are saints, but despite that, there are humans who are very good people and others who are bad, but even so, it does not matter if there are good or bad humans, supernatural beings only see them as a resource to continue living, even angels see them that way. Supernatural beings only see us that way, but they themselves do not realize that they are worse than humans, each and every one of them is rotten, even the angels who call themselves the purest, in my eyes, they are just a bunch of hypocrites together. On the part of Akemi and Mocha, they became arrogant, just like their kings, all because they won any type of battle and raiding games. They, like Rias and Sona, boast about their pieces and their strength. But if it weren't for the leaders who gave them any nonsense to make them strong or my help to defeat all our enemies, they wouldn't be where they are now. For my part, I feel happy. Well, my stay at the Kuo Academy is still the same as always. I endure the mockery and humiliation of the students, but when I leave, I start training for about 3 or 4 hours. After that I do my job, which is stunt motorcycling, which is why I decided to have that job. It was because I started to like motorcycles, so I set out to get my driver's license, which I was able to get without any problems, of course after a few weeks of practicing so as not to make mistakes. After that, with my father's motorcycle, I started going to circuses that were lucky enough to come to Kuo, or on Fridays after leaving the academy I would go to Kyoto to see if there was a circus to earn some money, since I couldn't always depend on my father's funds. But when the winter holidays started, I went to Chiba and Tokyo, Fukuoka and Saitama. I have definitely made a name for myself just by doing this job. The pay was pretty good, so I didn't complain, and besides I was doing what I liked. What more could I ask for? Well, as far as humans are concerned, in my eyes, we are also almost equal or equal to supernatural beings, but despite that, there are every human in the world who regrets the bad and horrible things they have done. Well, as far as supernatural beings are concerned, they do not regret what they do. I have witnessed how they are blinded by just being beings that humans believe did not exist. Although I am grateful for the things they have done to not put humanity at risk, but that gratitude went down the drain, knowing that if humans die, they will also die, since God's system affects each and every one of them, but more so the 3 biblical factions. But in short, I don't care how supernatural beings see me or treat me, whether I am useful or useless, as long as I protect humanity, I am able to continue with them until no one threatens the lives of humans. Current events plus authors POV. Right now we see how Issei was driving his father's motorcycle going to one of the circuses where he had to work. He only had a helmet on, so as not to have problems with the law, but under his helmet he was wearing headphones listening to music. He just kept driving, until he stopped at a red light to change the music on his cell phone. Once he did, he looked ahead to see a person he never expected to see. In front of him was Mephistopheles, who only had a malicious smile, so to speak. Mephistopheles. "It's time for you to pay your part of the deal, Issei," said the man. Well, Issei remembered what happened 11 years ago. Issei had been frozen, he didn't know what to do, he just stood there, while a great fear invaded him, but then, the horn of the car behind him sounded, that it made Issei turn his gaze forward, seeing that in reality Mephistopheles was not there where he saw him. Issei, leaving that aside, looks at the traffic light which was green, and without further ado decides to continue on his way. Chapter 1. The Calm Before the Storm. Authors Pav. We found ourselves in a rather large apartment. This apartment was very simple, but had everything essential. The whole place was very tidy, but we will focus on one of the rooms that was there. In that room, we see a 16-year-old Issei. The brown-haired boy was sleeping, moving from one side to the other, and sweating a lot. Without a doubt, the brown-haired boy was having a nightmare. But moments later, Issei woke up abruptly from his sleep, beginning to touch his face while sweating more intensely. He had an expression full of fear, but then his alarm went off, giving him a little scare. But when he realized it was his alarm, he just turned it off, then got up and got ready to go to Kuo Academy, but before going to the bathroom, he looked at a calendar that was next to his alarm, so to speak. Issei. 5 more days and I'll finally be able to reach the big leagues, he said with a somewhat happy tone and a smile, but he remembered his dream, making him lose all happiness and his smile. Later. Right now we see how Issei was in a cafeteria. The brown-haired boy only grabbed the coffee and a small paper bag which contained his breakfast. Issei. Thank you very much, Sam, he said in a grateful tone as he left and said goodbye to the man who had given him his order. Sam. You're welcome, Issei said with a smile, a handsome 19-year-old boy, blonde hair, while wearing the apron of said cafeteria. Issei, once he left the cafeteria alone, proceeded to walk towards the Kuo Academy, although on the way he drank his coffee, because lately he had had nightmares, some of which kept him awake, but with others, he managed to sleep a maximum of 2 or 3 hours. Issei. He can't be real, it's just my imagination. He couldn't have cured Mrs. Harry's illness, it must have just been a pure coincidence, he thought seriously, trying to make it seem as if Mephistopheles had never existed or known someone like that. However, the large cut on the palm of his right hand said otherwise, something that Issei tried to ignore every day, and before he knew it, he had already arrived at Kuo Academy. Issei. Kuo Academy, an academy in which those who have a high level of popularity can create false rumors, and others believe them even without looking for evidence that those rumors may be false or true. He thought something serious seeing said academy, and remembering how his 2 sisters created the rumor that he was a pervert. Causing everyone to begin to look at him with contempt and disgust. Issei. But what does it matter, this is my only connection I have with supernatural beings to fulfill my goal, he thought seriously, since he had several problems with one or another demon, fallen, angel, Nordic, yokai, etc., etc. Issei, the brown-haired boy, just ignored them and went to his usual desk, which was at the back of the room. Once seated, for some reason Issei remembered how he declared his love to Irina a year ago. However, Irina had rejected him because she ended up believing that he was a pervert and useless, something that she denied at first, but when she realized that he did not give any help or support in the missions. He ended up believing those rumors that he was useless and even perverted, which made him reject him in a horrible way. And on the one hand that had hurt Issei, but on the other hand, he hadn't started crying or anything like that, he just stood there for a few seconds and then left. Issei scratched his head to try to stop thinking about it, but for better or worse, his teacher came in. Change of scene. Right now we see how Issei was going directly to the same tree as always. He only went to that tree because for some reason, it flooded him with a great tranquility that he never had until now. Once he arrived, he just lay down near the tree to take a short nap, although he knew he didn't have to sleep much since he still had other classes to attend. But the boy's rest was interrupted by a certain blonde wearing the knight's piece, who just stood in front of Issei, causing him to open one eye and see that it was Kiba, who was looking at him with certain eyes of contempt. Kiba. Hey Haidu, but you told me to go to the club, the leaders want to talk to you, he said seriously and with contempt towards the brown-haired boy. Issei. Understood Udo-san, I'll follow you, he said seriously as he got up from the ground, then followed Kiba. The whole way neither of them spoke to each other. Once they both arrived at the club, Issei saw how the girls in the club seemed to be flirting with a man of about 23 or 24 years old. The brown-haired boy did not care what they did, rather, he wanted to know what the leaders of the biblical factions did. Along with them were Odin, leader of the Norse and father of all, the leader of the Yakeis of Kyoto, Yasaka, and last but not least, the leader of the Carmilla faction, a vampire faction dominated by only women, sits in Menhold Karnstein, but they were not the only ones. There were also the Seraph Gabriel, the supposed purest angel in heaven, the Penemu cadre, the most beautiful Grigori cadre, and the last one being the Mau Seraph Leviathan. Issei. May I know what you want to talk to me about, leaders? He said, asked seriously, knowing that all of them were hiding something since they were very serious, and also that they never asked to speak with him before, until now. Searches. Hi do Issei, we will be honest and direct with you, since you are of no use to the factions, you will be denied entry to the underworld, heaven, Grigori, Asgard, Kyoto and the Carmilla territory he said seriously, well that took Issei by surprise. Issei. Wait a moment, what does this mean? He said asked seriously since his goal to protect his own race, the humans, was crumbling, although he ended up receiving a blow to the stomach from Akemi. Akemi. I'll make it easier for you, bastard she said with contempt seeing Issei on the ground, who only gave a small smile that no one noticed. Akemi. You will be replaced by Alex Kun, since unlike you he is strong and useful something you will never be, she said pointing at the man, and then hitting Issei again who tried to defend himself from the blow, but only ended up receiving it. Issei. You can't do this to me he said in pain, while spitting out some blood, because Akemi did not hesitate to use a good part of her demon strength. Auden. We already did it brat and we all agree, now get him out of here he said seriously, getting fed up with the brown-haired boy's presence. Akemi. With pleasure she said with a smile and then left the club while taking Issei with her. Somewhere else. We see how Akemi and Issei had appeared in an alley, but the brown-haired boy tried to get up but only ended up receiving a kick in the stomach courtesy of Akemi, who kicked Issei a few times until he stopped when he saw how the brown-haired boy was spitting a lot of blood. Akemi. Listen to me carefully, if I find out again that you're meddling in demon affairs, it'll go worse for you than this time, understood? He said asked, grabbing his younger brother by the hair. Issei. Understood he said still in pain while Akemi just let go of him and then left the alley in a magic circle. Issei. I am very grateful for the blows, Akemi although I must admit that they hurt me too much he said seriously as he remembered how he put a small magic circle for tracking and communication on his back without him noticing. Issei just proceeded to sit down while creating a magic circle in his hand, causing a kind of map to appear, while a red dot was marked something that brought a smile to the brown-haired boy. Issei. They will need more than just words and blows to get rid of me he said and then began to heal himself with healing magic, although it was not very necessary because he used magic circles of protection to prevent Akemi's blows from being so powerful on him, but they still hurt. Issei, once healed, just got up from the ground to leave the alley. He just started walking aimlessly because since he was no longer at the academy he had nothing to do. He could go back, but he didn't want to end up getting a scolding from his teachers. The brown-haired boy only went to a fast food restaurant to order a hamburger and some fries to go. His order took no more than 15 minutes. Once he received it, he just paid and went to a nearby park that he really liked. Once he arrived at the park he just sat on a bench and then began to enjoy his food. While the brown-haired boy was eating he saw how several children were accompanied by their parents while others had fun playing with them. That was what motivated Issei to protect humans, he wanted the smile the children had to remain marked on their faces, he didn't want to see them suffer like he suffered from the death of his father, he was willing to shed every drop of blood, sweat and tears in order to protect humanity. Excuse me could I sit here if you don't mind? Asked a man. That man was about 45 years old, had brown hair somewhat similar to his own, and had gray eyes, and also a brown beard, while he was wearing a dark green jacket and a black shirt underneath. Issei. No I was leaving anyway he said as he stood up, but. Don't worry, I'll only stay a few minutes, and I'll leave he said in a calm tone as he sat down and Issei uncertainly did the same. Both remained in a somewhat awkward silence, although the man didn't seem to care, he just looked at the park, while Issei continued eating his hamburger until he finished eating it. May I know what bothers you, boy? He said asked without looking at the brown-haired boy, seeing how the park was being flooded by some laughter from the boys and girls who were playing while there was one or another passing by. Issei. Why do you ask? He said asked trying not to seem uncomfortable, although this reminded him of when he met Mephistopheles in that river, even though he didn't want to remember it. I can tell that you want to leave here, although I don't see anything wrong with it after all I'm a stranger who just sat next to you, he said with some amusement, while Issei wasn't quite sure he wanted to talk to him, but he did anyway. Issei. A long time ago, when I was a child I met a man he said with some fear remembering Mephistopheles, but more that dark tone when he was in the hospital where his mother was admitted. I see well you don't have to be afraid or distrustful, I won't do anything to you, he said in a tone of voice that completely calmed the brown-haired boy. Issei. Who are you? He said asked looking at the man. Chuck. My name is Chuck Shirley and I am from the United States, but if you want you can call me Chuck said the one already recognized as Chuck with a small smile. Issei. Nice to meet you Chuck, my name is Issei Haidu he said, reciprocating the man's smile, although he didn't know why he did it. Chuck. Do you want to know something, Issei? He said asked looking at the people who were in the park. Issei. What is it? He said asked something curious although keeping his distance from the man. Chuck. That despite all the mistakes they make, despite the fact that they kill the environment or do things for their own benefit, every person in this world and even criminals are good people. They just had the bad luck of having been born in circumstances that were not at all good, he said with some sadness, while Issei only paid attention to what he said. Chuck. Maybe every person in this world is greedy, lustful, traitors, deceitful, swindlers, murderers, etc., etc. Even so, they are all beautiful as without, he said with a small smile, and then looked at the brown-haired boy. Chuck. I know what I said sounds a bit stupid, but that's my way of seeing humans, he said with a somewhat amused smile, while Issei was surprised, since in front of him there was someone who had the same thoughts about humanity. Chuck. I know we just met, but if you need help with anything you can count on me. Here's my phone number in case you want to talk, he said, giving the brown-haired boy a piece of paper with a number written on it. Issei. Okay, he said, somewhat unsure of wanting to grab that little piece of paper, but when he noticed how Chuck radiated great peace and calm, he grabbed that little piece of paper. Chuck. Well, I'm leaving. See you later, Issei, he said, getting up from the bench as he left and said goodbye to the brunette. Issei. See you, Chuck, he said, watching as the man he had just met was leaving the park. 5 days later. It's Saturday right now and everyone knows it. We are in Sasuda, or also known as Saitama Stadium. This stadium is located in Midori-ku, Saitama Prefecture in the Kanto region. But we'll focus on a certain brown-haired boy who had a motorcycle suit, something that cost him a lot of money, although it was worth every damn penny, and having bought it, right now he was looking at himself in a mirror saying. Issei. I can do it, I can do this jump, I know I can, he said, encouraging himself, and then someone entered the room where the brown-haired boy was. Hey kid, are you ready for this? He said, looking at Issei, who just said. Issei. Yes, I am, he said with his spirits through the roof as he grabbed his helmet. Listen to me, I have spent all my money to be able to rent this stadium, all my savings are on the jump you will take, you better complete it, he said, seriously looking at Issei, who only gave a small smile. Issei. Trust me, I'll do it, he said, trying to make the man stop being nervous because he was shaking and also looked very sweaty. A few moments later. Hey kid, excuse me for the tone I used to speak to you before, it's just that I don't want anything to happen to you, he said with concern towards the brown-haired boy, completely forgetting about the money he spent. In fact, it seemed like he forgot about that. Issei. Don't worry, I'll be fine, Itsuki, he said with a comforting tone to the now recognized Itsuki, who only gave a small smile. Itsuki. You know, the good thing about this jump is that you made me remove the cars, it would have definitely been complete suicide, he said, seeing how the entire Saitama Stadium was empty. Itsuki. I'm pretty sure you land on the soft, well-placed padding, he said with a small smile, but then he saw how there were 6 helicopters above the stadium. Announcer. Ladies and gentlemen, this young acrobat who came out of nowhere will not jump over 50 cars as planned, but instead will jump over 6 Bella 1 Iroquois helicopters, he said, while from the sky, as he said, 6 helicopters were descending until almost touching the ground of the stadium. Announcer. Never before has such a dangerous stunt been attempted, he said to the disbelief of the entire audience, and Itsuki himself, who only looked at Issei, who only had an amused smile. Issei. You weren't the only one who spent all his savings, you know, he said with an amused tone, remembering how it cost him almost a fortune to rent those helicopters. Itsuki. Why, Issei, why didn't you tell me? He said seriously and at the same time nervously while his blood pressure dropped. Issei. Because I knew you would get that way, he said, seeing how Itsuki was getting hysterical. Itsuki. Maybe I'm an old-fashioned, stingy and grumpy old man, but human sacrifice makes me very nervous, he said hysterically, and couldn't even see the helicopters. Itsuki. Why helicopters, friends? And what's more, how did you get them? He said, looking at Issei, who only got a small flashback. Flashback? We see a 12-year-old Issei looking at his father's belongings, but also his photos, which showed how his father, around 16 and 18 years old, did various stunts with the same motorcycle that he left him as an inheritance. Issei. Sugoi, seriously, Otu-san did all these stunts, he said in surprise, without knowing that his father had done such a thing. However, he saw a diary which he grabbed to start reading it page by page, until he stopped on one and then said. Issei. A jump with what helicopter, he said somewhat incredulously upon learning that his father wanted to make a big jump with a helicopter instead of a car or truck. And flashback. Issei. It was written in my father's diary, and how I got the helicopters is thanks to one of his friends. He managed to give me a huge discount to have the helicopters, he said with nostalgia as he remembered his father and gratitude towards said friend. Issei. He thought it would be great, he said, realizing that the jump was undoubtedly extremely dangerous, but it was inevitable to see it as great or much more than that. Itsuki. Well, it's great, but at the same time it's kind of crazy what you're thinking of doing, but I don't think you're going to retire, right? he said looking at the brown-haired boy who shook his head with a marked smile. Issei. I won't do it he said while putting on his helmet. Itsuki. Well, listen carefully if you want to live. When you're halfway up the ramp, hit the nitrogen. If you do it before, you'll end up getting stung, okay? He said motivating the brown-haired boy. Issei. Okay he said while nodding. Issei. How much nitrogen did you put in the tanks? He said while Itsuki turned around for a moment but still said. Itsuki. The same thing they put on spaceships he said, although at the moment of doing so, Issei had accelerated with everything. Itsuki. He did it he said very surprised and happy that the brown-haired boy did not die. Itsuki. I knew he was going to do it, I knew it he said lied, although he did have some faith that the brown-haired boy would achieve it. Announcer. Give a big round of applause for Haidu Issei 100 meters is definitely a great achievement for someone as young as him he said, while all the spectators were more than amazed as they repeated the brown-haired boy's name. While on Issei's part, he only took off his helmet to see how people said his name, something that brought him a small friendly smile. Later. After several autographs and photographs that several of the brown-haired fans asked him for, something that he gladly did, and a few interviews with different television stations that were all over the place, Issei was able to go to the hotel where he was staying in Saitama. Right now Issei was taking a shower as calmly as possible, removing the sweat he had due to the nervousness he got after having made that jump. Once he finished showering and changing, he alone went to the living room, but when he did, he saw Itsuki with a big serious look. Itsuki Issei let me tell you something he said seriously looking at the brown-haired boy. Issei. What is it that you want to tell me, Itsuki-san? He said with a nervous smile looking at his friend. Itsuki. We make too much money, damn it he said happily and cheerfully, something that baffled the brown-haired boy, thinking that he would end up receiving a scolding from the man. Issei. Huh? He exclaimed, surprised and at the same time curious. Itsuki. That's right, we got twice as much as I thought or at least I had a dream in which you achieved that jump he said with some mockery towards the brown-haired boy. Issei. Wait a moment, are you telling me that you didn't have faith in me to be able to do it? He said somewhat incredulously that Itsuki didn't have faith in him. Itsuki. You said it, I had but not now he said with a smile, while Issei just let out a sigh. Issei. I don't know what to do with you he said while Itsuki had 2 sodas in small bottles, opening them without difficulty, although he would prefer a beer, although he couldn't do it because Issei is a minor. Itsuki. Let's toast Issei, and I would also like to make you a proposal he said, giving a bottle of soda to Issei who accepted the bottle and then clinked it with Itsuki's. Issei. What is that proposal? He said somewhat intrigued by that proposal. Itsuki. Right now you know you're in the big leagues, right? He said looking at the brown-haired boy. Issei. Yes, I'm very surprised to have gotten there in such a short time, since it took several motorcyclists years to reach the big leagues he said while taking a sip of his drink. Itsuki. That's the reason, let's make a team he said with some emotion, while Issei was surprised by that. Issei. Team? He said confused. Itsuki. Correct you, me along with other trusted guys we can be great in the future Issei, what do you say? He said with a smile while Issei says. Issei. I'll think about it, Itsuki-san he said, taking another sip of his drink. Itsuki. Okay, take all the time you need, you know how to contact me he said, while also taking a sip of the soda. 3 days later. After Issei had achieved that jump in the Saitama Stadium, our brown-haired boy had proceeded to return to Kuo, but not before asking for the part of the money that belonged to him from the profits. Itsuki gave his part to Issei, which would be almost 50%, although despite that there was still a large amount of money stacked up. It took him a total of 2 days to reach Kuo, although along the way he had stopped for several things including breakfast, going to the bathroom and dinner, although when he was seen by people they asked him for a photo or two, something that Issei accepted kindly. Present. We see how Issei was in a cemetery, more specifically in front of his father's grave. Issei for his part could not help but have an expression full of sadness, while it seemed like he was going to cry. Issei only put some flowers on top of his father's grave, while he took out the ones that were withered and then said. Issei. I did it Otu-sen I managed to jump on a motorcycle of more than 100 meters and also use helicopters like you wanted to do he said, looking at his father's grave, while his eyes were teary. Issei. At first I was scared, I was afraid of dying at that very moment and I was even willing not to make that jump, but you motivated me to do it he said with a small grateful smile. Issei. When I was almost halfway through the jump I began to remember every moment we spent together, every joke you told me to cheer me up after having a difficult day, and even you being on the other side, you helped me complete this stunt he said just to crouch down. Issei. I am very grateful to you Otu-san goodbye, and I will visit you again in a week he said goodbye to his father. Our chestnut left the cemetery without further ado, but when he left, tears began to come out of his eyes, while a few drops of water wet him, indicating that it was going to rain. Issei alone got on his father's motorcycle that he left parked near the cemetery. Issei alone went directly to the apartment where he lived. Once the brown-haired boy arrived at his apartment, he only parked his motorcycle in the parking spaces. After that he went up to the room where he lived in the building. While he walked towards his room on the way he greeted some people who were his neighbors who congratulated the brown-haired boy for completing his stunt. Although when he arrived at his room the brown-haired boy only entered and then turned on the lights of the house and the music which was. Issei just went to the kitchen where he proceeded to prepare something simple to eat. Once that was done, he just headed to the living room of his house to sit on a single-person sofa. The brown-haired boy only lowered the volume of the music with a remote control that he had on a small table next to him and then turned on the television. The reason he did that was because his favorite show had just started. The brown-haired boy was completely enjoying his cartoon, but the tranquility and joy he had at that moment was interrupted by someone who was knocking on the door. Somewhat annoyed he gets up from his sofa to go to the door and open it to say, "Issei." What the need he couldn't finish speaking since the person responsible for knocking on the door of his apartment room had been his mother who was accompanied by Akemi, Mocha, Riaz and the girls in her entourage. Issei didn't say anything, the place remained in an awkward silence without anyone saying anything, but then Kaneko began to sniff something, and without further ado, she entered Issei's apartment, but not before saying, "Excuse me." Of course the other girls did the same, while Issei tried to stop them, failing miserably. The girls wanted to know why Kaneko came in just like that, but in reality it was because she had smelled a bottle with several sweets inside, causing a drop of sweat to all of them. However, Haru was serious and then turned her gaze to her last of her children, who grabbed a bottle of sweets that Kaneko saw and served the sweets in a glass. "Issei. Here you go," he said, offering her the cup with sweets. Kaneko. "Thank you Issei senpai," she said, grabbing the cup. "Issei. What, do you also want sweets?" he said, looking at the other girls. Haru. "No, we don't want sweets, we want to know what you're going to tell us about this, Issei," he said, grabbing the TV remote control and changing the channel to the news channel, which showed the 100-meter jump that the brown-haired boy had made. "Issei. Because I would do it, they are personal and at the same time private things," he said seriously without even caring about having tried to lie or something similar about what he did a few days ago, since it would undoubtedly be useless and at the same time idiotic to try to do that. "Riaz. Then I ordered you to tell us," he said authoritatively. Issei. "Oh, what else?" he said defiantly. "Riaz. You will have to leave the city and never come back. I can make you do that," she said, knowing that Issei would be kicked out of the city if he informed his older brother. Issei. "Okay," he said. Well, that only brought a small triumphant smile to Riaz, but they didn't wait for Issei to go to the phone in the living room to listen. Issei. "Hello moving services, if I want a truck to be sent to this address, do you have paper to write it down?" he said, but then the phone is destroyed by a lightning bolt courtesy of Akeno. Issei. "Now that they're happening to you, do you want me to leave the city or not?" he said while seeing his entire landline destroyed. "Mocha. We just want explanations," Issei said, the first of the Haidu brothers, seriously. Issei. "And what do you want me to explain to you? You are nothing to me and I am nothing to you either. I am not your servant, I am not your brother, and I am not your son, either. You cannot claim anything from me," he said seriously, something that left all the girls present silent, while Haru felt hurt hearing what Issei told her. Issei. "You come to ask me for explanations in my house and home as if this place belonged to you. Besides, what do you care, or rather since when do you care what I do with my life?" he said seriously, looking at the girls. "Akemi. We just want you to explain to us why you work in those places, Issei," she said, something serious since seeing how Issei was on television and about to make that jump almost gave him a heart attack. Issei. "Again with that, perhaps you have forgotten what I was to you, or at least how I matter to you. The only thing I was to you was your entertainment, humiliation, mockery, abuse, a simple toy of fun which you saw as replaceable," he said seriously, while each one remembered each humiliation they made the brunette go through, but despite that, he has not shown any kind of hatred or resentment towards them. Issei. "What I do or want to do never matters to you in your lives. You wanted me out of the supernatural, and now I am. You replaced me because I was weak and useless, and you replaced me with someone better, but since you did that last thing to me, you are just more than simple strangers to me," he said, while the girls felt their hearts ache as they heard every word Issei said. Haru. "What you're doing is not good, Ice-chan, you could get hurt," or she finished speaking because Issei interrupted her. Issei. "Or what? You are not like them. Since you found out that my father cheated on you, you began to ignore me as if I did not exist. I had to learn to fend for myself at only 6 years old, enduring every mockery, humiliation that Akemi and Mocha did to me, along with their little friends." When I needed you the most by my side you were not there, he said, still seriously, causing Haru to remember how he always ignored his son. Haru. Ice-chan, I didn't finish because Issei interrupted me again. Issei. If you have nothing else to do here you can go, he said, while turning his back on all the girls present in his house. Roswis. But Issei-kun couldn't finish speaking as out of nowhere, he began to emanate an incredible amount of magic and then form more than 100 magic circles surrounding them all, leaving them with no escape or time to defend themselves because some of the magic circles prevented them from using their magic sacred gear's sacred sword. Issei. No one in the building will get hurt since there is a barrier here that will protect everyone except you, if you don't leave my house right now, he said to undo the barrier. Well, Riaz had no other option but to make a magic circle and leave with her entourage, although Mocha had to make her own since she was not part of the Gremory entourage. At night. We see how Issei was preparing dinner for the night. He had nothing else to do except train or study, although he had already done those two things, however. He left the knife with which he was cutting an onion to just go to a bookshelf that was in the living room. Once he arrived in the living room he only proceeded to look for a book which he searched for by its initials. Issei tried not to get lost among the other books, but he found it. He alone took out a book which was surrounded by magic circles, which with a single snap, he removed them all. Issei proceeded to read the book which told the story of the demons, the person responsible for having written it being the original Mao Lucifer himself. How Issei was able to obtain that book, which is undoubtedly something very private of the underworld, is easy. He borrowed it from the current Lucifer searches, who until now has not noticed the disappearance of that book. The brown-haired boy just kept moving forward page after page, not caring about his old life, but rather trying to find someone. He kept moving forward page by page without stopping in a hurried manner, while his heart was beating every second, while his instincts were telling him to stop, but he found someone. He had found the page he was looking for, or rather, the information about the demon he was looking for. He found a page that spoke of Mephistopheles, the same man or rather demon who made a contract when he was a child. Issei read each word carefully, but despite being human, he knew the language of demons because he learned it a long time ago and even spoke it, but leaving that aside. The brown-haired boy had learned that Mephistopheles was the true firstborn of the original Lucifer, while the second was none other than Rissavam Livan Lucifer, the demon that the Trixa released a few months ago before Issei saw the figure of Mephistopheles on the way back to his apartment. Issei wanted to continue reading, but he couldn't do so because he began to feel like his hands seemed to be burning. He only looked at his hands to see how they were very red, as if something was squeezing them too hard to make them have that intense color that was increasing every second. But the brown-haired boy managed to hear the sound of a motorcycle outside the building, but he didn't even have the slightest idea of how he could have heard it, since his room was on the 7th floor of the 18 floors there were. He just put that book away again, but not before sealing it with several magic circles and then leaving his room and the building. When Issei left the building he didn't see any motorcycle outside, however he managed to hear the sound of the motorcycle's exhaust pipe again. He was somewhat unsure, but with two magic circles formed in the palm of his hand, he went towards where the noise of that motorcycle was heard. That noise ended up taking him to a somewhat wide alley, but that didn't matter. What really mattered was the motorcycle, which was undoubtedly Issei's father's motorcycle, which was on in the middle of the alley. The brown-haired boy was quite surprised by that reason that he ended up undoing both magic circles to approach his father's motorcycle. However, when he was close to said vehicle, he felt a strong chill that ran down his entire spine. Issei, feeling that chill, didn't want to turn around. He didn't want to do it for anything in the world, but gathering a little bravery and courage he did it. But when he turned around to see if someone was behind him, the brown-haired boy saw how in front of him was Mephistopheles, who hasn't changed at all over the years. He was an exact copy of how he met him when he was just a child. Mephistopheles. Hello Issei, it's been a long time since we saw each other, he said with a small smile, looking at the brown-haired boy, while his eyes shone the same fire-like orange hue. Chapter 2. It's time for you to pay your part of the deal, Issei. Authors Pav. We are in Italy, more specifically Venice, on the island of San Michael or Miguel as you want to call it. On this island, or rather cemetery, we see how several people visited the graves of their deceased relatives, something too obvious or else no one would be there. But we will focus on Alex, the same man who was in the occult club the day when Issei was replaced by him due to his uselessness and lack of power, but leaving that aside. Alex is a young man with short black hair, his pale skin resembling that of a corpse wherever you look, his grey eyes and all his clothing, the jacket he was wearing, the vest along with the shirt that was under the jacket, the leather pants and the shoes, everything he was wearing was black. The dark-haired man was walking as calmly as possible, while he seemed to be looking for someone's grave, although he was practically walking through a part of the cemetery which was forbidden to enter. There was even a sign that said that, although it was clearly in Italian, but he ignored it. But leaving that aside, we see how Alex seemed to get more and more frustrated, something that seemed not to be noticed because he maintained a serious and cold expression, but in that. "Hey, what are you doing here? This part of the cemetery is visible at the entrance," asked the voice of a man, this being the caretaker of the cemetery who was looking at Alex. However, the caretaker was speaking in Italian, but. Translation. "Hey, what are you doing here? This part of the cemetery is off limits." Note. I want you to tell me if you want me to continue with this topic of languages, that is, translating when someone speaks in Italian, French, etc., etc. If this bothers you, you can let me know and I will stop doing it. End of note. Alex. Why is the entrance closed? He said asked seriously while the caretaker received a chill down his spine, something not at all pleasant or nice. Translation. Why is entry prohibited? Caretaker. This area will be remodeled for some days. Someone could get hurt if they enter here, he said, while there were several work tools near where he was. Translation. This part of the area will be remodeled in a few days, and someone could get hurt if they enter here. Alex. I'm leaving the report. Do you remember any of them who were transferred to the cemetery? He said asked in a serious and cold tone while speaking very fluent Italian, seeming not to hear what the man said. Leaving that aside, do you remember any graves that were moved to the cemetery? Caretaker. Tomb. Si ricordo bene il cimitero ha ricevuto alcune tombe diversi anni fa. Also recently a tomba è stata spostata in another cimitero, the man said nervously, because Alex was approaching, and for some reason he didn't feel nothing good coming from the boy. Translation. Grave. If I remember correctly, the cemetery received some graves several years ago, although recently one grave was transferred to another cemetery. Alex. Do you know where that grave is? He said asked seriously while standing near the man as he had a feeling that that was the grave he was looking for. Translation. Do you know where that grave is? Caretaker. Mi dispiace non posso dirtelo hogi apparnato troppo e ticcido nel modo più gentile di andertine, he said. Translation. I'm sorry, but I can't tell you. I've already talked too much and I ask you in the nicest way to leave. Alex. You don't have to tell me, he said seriously, only to grab the caretaker by the neck, causing him to start losing air, but not only that, but he began to lose his skin color, while his face took on an increasingly darker expression. Translation. You shouldn't have said that. Alex. Apparently I'll have to go back to that city, he said seriously, as he saw the memories of the cemetery caretaker, because by taking his soul, despite not having had his consent, he was able to access his memories. But then Alex began to feel a very familiar presence at an incredibly distant distance, something that made him more serious than before, while a figure appeared behind him. You need my help, Alex? Said a boy's voice behind Alex, although for some reason this boy mockingly said Alex's name for some reason. Alex. I want you to go to the address where that presence is, and if it is with someone, I want you to destroy it, he said seriously looking in that direction, while the boy had disappeared out of nowhere. Alex. You shouldn't have shown up now, father, he said seriously as he left that cemetery without caring about the caretaker's corpse. With Issei. Now we return to Japan, but unlike Italy, in Japan it was night while in Italy it was barely 2:50 p.m, but we will look at the city of Kuo in which, in a somewhat wide alley a few meters from Issei's apartment, a reunion was taking place between Issei and Mephistopheles. On Issei's part, it could be seen that he had an expression full of fear because having Mephistopheles in front of him made him remember when and where he met him. Note. Between Japan and Italy there is an 8-hour difference, but the minutes remain the same. End of note. Mephistopheles. What's wrong, Issei? Did a cat eat your tongue or are you surprised to see me again? He asked with a somewhat mocking smile towards the brown-haired boy who only said. Issei. You're not real, you're just another image that my brain is projecting, he said, trying to hide his fear and nervousness with a smile. Mephistopheles. You heard me when you say that, Issei. Have you forgotten the day I saved you from almost falling into that river, or when you signed the contract for me to cure your mother's illness? He said, trying to appear sad but still keeping his mocking tone, while Issei just opened his eyes wide in surprise. Issei. Why, you're really? He said asked stuttering with fear, while Mephistopheles just approached him with a smile. Mephistopheles. Of course I'm real, I'm much more real than you think, he said with a smile approaching the brown-haired boy. Issei. Get away from me, he exclaimed as he cast a spell at Mephistopheles, which he easily undid with his staff. Mephistopheles. I have not come to hurt you, Issei. Calm down please, he said in a calm tone, just looking at the motorcycle that he himself had brought to the place where they were now. Mephistopheles. Wow, what a nice bike you have, your father sure had good taste, he said with a smile looking at the brown-haired boy. Issei. How do you know my father? He said asked seriously while little by little he lost the fear and nervousness he had, since he knew that sooner or later he had to face him, whether it was real or not. Mephistopheles. Let me tell you that you have never been alone, Issei, he said, something nostalgic, trying to get closer to the brown-haired boy, but Issei just backed away, going to the other side of the motorcycle. Issei. What do you mean by that? He said seriously, looking at Mephistopheles. Mephistopheles. Oh Issei, I was always by your side from the beginning, he said with a smile, so that Issei opened his eyes in disbelief and then remembered that. Mephistopheles. The separation of your parents, your mistreatment at school and academy, your beginning in the supernatural, and when you made that seal for the tricks of your acrobatics in Chiba, Tokyo, Fukuoka, and even your 100-meter jump at the Saitama Stadium, he said, with a proud tone in everything he said, while Issei could remember how Mephistopheles was always by his side. At no time had he left, but rather he watched him without him or anyone else noticing it. Mephistopheles. I was even by your side at your father's funeral, he said, remembering how he was by Issei's side at said funeral, while the brown-haired boy at that time didn't notice. Issei. You were the one who could achieve all that, you kept me alive when I should have died a long time ago, he said seriously, while remembering that despite having learned magic, he was still human. Although his physical capabilities did not exceed those of a low-class devil, his handling of magic surpassed that of a high-class devil. In addition to this achievement of surpassing Akeno in the lightning element and Sona in the water element, he handled magic at a different level because Issei used magic as if it were an extension of his own body. But he knew that this was not enough to survive in a world with extremely strong beings. Mephistopheles. You're wrong about that, Issei, at no time did I intervene in your adventures in the supernatural world, I only watched what you did, he said with a proud tone, knowing that the brown-haired boy was not a weak person. Mephistopheles. Every enemy you defeated, every spell you developed and created yourself, and even in the most critical moments you remained calm and acted as you should. Every bodily pain you suffered, every drop of blood, every drop of sweat and every tear you shed, you managed to obtain great results, and all of that you achieved with your own efforts, just like those posters, the interviews, your fans, the day you made that leap that no one would have made, everything at that moment exclaimed and shouted. Issei. Issei, he said in a proud tone of voice towards the brown-haired boy. But when he said the last Issei, his tone of voice was deep and thick, the same tone of voice that Issei heard when he was a child when he was in the hospital with his mother. However, Mephistopheles' face changed to a more demonic appearance, with fangs and black eyes. Mephistopheles. I am very proud of you, he said, losing that appearance and his voice returning to the same as before, while Issei had frozen upon hearing the previous tone of voice. Issei. What do you want from me? He said, asked seriously, realizing that he had no escape. Mephistopheles. I came because it's time for you to pay your part of the deal, Issei. I want you to find someone called Blackheart and finish him off along with those who accompany him, he said seriously and in a somewhat authoritarian tone. Issei. Why me, don't you have someone else to do this? He said, asked seriously and annoyed, looking at Mephisto, who only smiled. Mephistopheles. You could say so, although to be honest, I prefer you to do this job, he said seriously, while remembering two skeletal figures surrounded by a very unusual fire. Mephistopheles. But don't worry, if you succeed in your job I will return your soul while your mother will continue living, a nice deal, don't you think? He said, asked looking at the brown-haired boy who just got on his father's motorcycle. Issei. Okay, I'll do it, where is he? He said, asked looking at Mephistopheles and willing to recover his soul without even caring if his mother lives or dies. Mephistopheles. You'll have to look for him yourself, but don't worry, he must have already felt my presence wherever he is. However, he won't come, he will send one of his companions to finish you off, he said something serious, while Issei tried to drive his motorcycle, but there was something that prevented him from leaving and looking for the one Blackheart sent to kill him. Issei. What does this mean, Mephistopheles? He said, asked seriously and angry because he couldn't drive his motorcycle, much less get off of it. Mephistopheles. I will send you to where one of my son's companions is, and also, consider this an increase in power, he said, hitting his cane against the ground so that the motorcycle would then begin to drive itself. Once that was done and Issei left that alley, the brown-haired boy saw how everything around him became blurry due to the speed of his motorcycle, which was going at a speed impossible for a human vehicle. Issei tried to use the brakes, but it was useless, but while the motorcycle continued on its way, the two tires of the motorcycle began to emanate fire. But along the way the tires left a line of fire, while the windows of the parked cars broke into thousands of shards, the light bulbs on the lamp posts exploded out of nowhere, and the mailboxes melted like candles. But every time the motorcycle went up in speed, the parked cars flew out, destroying one or another store and leaving a huge mess on the street. But now we will focus on one of the exits of the city of Kuo, which had a rather large sign that said, "Welcome to Kuo," clearly in Japanese, but behind that sign, there was a motorized patrol car who was in charge of guarding the place. Note. When I refer to motorized patrol, I am referring to those police officers who ride around on motorcycles with a speedometer in hand and know who is going over the speed limit or not, but there are others who are in charge of rescues, detaining criminals, etc. Although to tell the truth I don't know if that's how they call it or what, in any case if I'm wrong, I would like to be notified about this, end of note. On the part of the patrolman he only raised his head a little because he felt that something was going to happen, until in the distance he could see a small yellow figure which was approaching where he was at a high speed. The policeman only pointed with the speedometer that he had in his hand at that figure. But he ended up surprised because that figure was going at more than 100 mph per hour and increasing until the policeman saw how that figure was very close to his location. Passing by him leaving a line of fire, well the sign that welcomed Kuo exploded out of nowhere while he alone flew somewhat far from his motorcycle. He alone turned around to see with astonishment and fear the figure that was moving away from the city. On the motorcycle side he continued driving to an evacuated train station, the same place where Mephistopheles said the supposed companion of Blackheart would be, but once Issei arrived, the following happened. Once all of Issei's flesh was consumed by that fire, his entire body became an exact copy of a skeleton, but with the difference that fire surrounded his entire body, but not a normal fire, but fire from hell itself. But some parts of his body were covered by the clothes he was wearing, however the shirt, pants and shoes were badly burned, causing them to lose all color and were even breaking. On the part of that skeletal figure that Issei had become, he was looking at everything around him, but with a quick movement he proceeded to look forward to see a man of about 20 years old, white hair and red eyes. He was wearing a black leather jacket and jeans of the same color as his jacket, and he was also wearing gloves, although his face and gloves had a little blood. "Wow, so you are the supposed Phantom Avenger that Mephistopheles talked so much about," he said with a touch of amusement, revealing the name of that skeletal figure which said nothing. "I see that you are not much of a talker, but I will still introduce myself," he said while bowing to say. "Gressel. I am Gressel, a demon of the earth element. I hope you entertain me, Avenger," he said, appearing in front of Issei and giving him a strong blow that sent him crashing into a wall and then falling to the ground. Note: the demons from the first Phantom Vengeance movie will have the same names, but with a different appearance and power levels than the movie, since in my view and opinion, they were weak to be honest, end of note. "Gressel. Are you serious? You are the great Phantom Avenger, you are just a damn weakling," he said with mockery and arrogance, seeing how Issei was on the ground, but suddenly. On the part of the Avenger, he got up from the ground while the fire surrounding his body began to increase, something that brought a smile full of emotion and arrogance to Gressel, who only reappeared in front of Issei, ready to break his skull with a kick. But the Earth Demon did not expect Issei to have grabbed his leg, and then with his skeletal hands, he bent his leg to a practically inhuman angle, and then gave Gressel a strong blow to the stomach that sent him somewhat far away. "Gressel. That was a good hit, but you'll need more than that if you want to kill me," he said with a superior smile, while his leg fell back into place. The Avenger for his part did not lose sight of Gressel, however. The skeletal figure turned his sight towards a very long chain near him, however. Gressel did the same afterwards. A large stake of earth came out from under the Avenger, something that he managed to dodge and then go in the direction of the chain. However, when he was close to grabbing that chain he was trapped in a dome of rocks, and once that dome was completed, several stakes of rocks were created inside that dome, being the one responsible Gressel, who had an expression full of disappointment and boredom in that he says, "Gressel. Damn, I thought you would be stronger, but you were just another victim under my control of the earth," he said, disappointed but also arrogant when he realized that he defeated Mephistopheles' pet. When Gressel was about to leave, he heard a loud noise behind him, something that caused him to stop and look back. When he did, he saw how Issei was still alive, but losing his shirt as well as pants, revealing his entire body made of hellfire and bones, while in his hands, he had the chain that he previously wanted to grab. "Gressel. I see you're still alive, but let's see if you can keep up with me," he said as he created an earth glove on his left arm, attacking Issei, who wrapped the chain around his right skeletal arm and then went after Gressel. When the two were close they had collided fist against fist at the same time, however the force they both applied was monstrous, while the ground beneath them was breaking. Both Gressel and Issei applied a lot of force, causing their feet to begin to bury themselves, until Gressel with a quick movement connected a strong blow to the Avenger's jaw, knocking him out of the place they were in. Gressel, seeing this, did not wait and made a great leap in the direction where the skeletal figure was. The Avenger had fallen in a place somewhat far from the train station, but when he tried to get up, Gressel fell on top of him and began to savagely beat the Avenger, while on both of his arms, he had two earth gloves which only increased his strength. Although in one of his blows that he tried to give to the Avenger, the Hellfire skeleton had stopped his left fist, something that took him by surprise since he thought he was stunned, but he did not expect the Avenger to hit him in the face, that sent him crashing into a wall that was far from where they were. That blow had undoubtedly hurt Gressel, since where he received the blow he ended up losing skin, something that tried to regenerate, but for some reason he couldn't do it when he was ready to get out of that wall and continue fighting against the Avenger. He didn't expect the aforementioned to appear in front of him ready to hit him, which he managed to defend himself against with a wall of earth that he managed to create. However, that wall of earth was easily destroyed by the brown-haired boy who with his chain grabbed Gressel by the neck to bring him towards him and give the earth demon a strong blow in the face, making him kneel while he tried to remove the chain from his neck but couldn't because the chain burned his hands and neck, which couldn't regenerate. At that very moment, Gressel began to be the Phantom Avenger's punching bag. The skeletal figure brutally and savagely beat the Earth Demon, who lost more and more of his skin because his regeneration was not working, but at the last moment Issei was going to give him the final blow to kill him. Gressel smiles and then removes the chain from his neck and gives the Avenger a strong blow, causing him to fly several kilometers away. The skeletal figure ended up falling into a forest, where out of nowhere, several trees that were around him were destroyed, and then a creature with a demonic shape appeared. This is the demon form of Gressel, and his companions like Abigail the Wind Demon, Wallow the Water Demon, and Blackheart himself will have a demonic form which will be more powerful than their human forms. Gressel: I didn't think I would have to use this against you, but that doesn't matter anymore today, and in this place is where you will die, Avenger, he said with a very demonic and macabre tone of voice. Avenger. Ghost. Come here and try it, you moron, he said in a thick dark voice as he stretched out his chain, which was impregnated with hellfire, while the chain seemed to be melting. Note: every time Issei enters his Phantom Avenger form, he will not have even 5% of control of it because he barely obtained it, but instead he will have a kind of autopilot, so to speak, to fight demons or kill criminals, although that will change when Issei can control it completely. End note. Gressel did not wait and went down until he touched the ground. He alone began to walk towards the Avenger, who did the same, and once the two were face to face, the Earth Demon did not wait and proceeded to hit the Avenger, who managed to defend himself from that blow, but was still dragged several meters from where he was before. But when he was about to attack Gressel, the demon was already in front of him, giving him a strong kick right in his ribs on the left side and then giving him another blow, but this time in his sternum. But not content with that, the Earth Demon tried to grab the Avenger's skull, but in doing so, his hand burned and he felt a great and hellish pain. However, Gressel did not expect to receive a good right hook to the face, courtesy of the Avenger, who had tangled his chain in his right skeletal fist, but Mephistopheles, his supposed pet, not content with that, with his left hand, grabbed one of Gressel's horns and then with his right hand, hit Gressel's face repeatedly. A few moments later, the Avenger stopped hitting Gressel to just position himself on the back of the Earth Demon. Once he did so, he saw Gressel's large wings and he just grabbed both wings with his bony hands and touched them. Gressel: don't do it. If you do it, I will He didn't finish speaking as the Avenger had torn off both of his wings without any mercifulness, eliciting a great cry of pain from Gressel. Once the Avenger did that, he was going to kill Gressel once and for all and forever. However, when he was going to kill him with his own hands, he ended up being crushed by two giant rocks, courtesy of Gressel, who had his hands together, indicating that he was the one responsible for having crushed a brown-haired boy with those two rocks. But the Earth Demon did not fall short. He only got up from the ground and then moved away from the chestnut tree, and then with both of his hands raised towards the sky, he began to emanate an enormous magical pressure that all factions felt, and it scared them, since that magical pressure was a dark and evil one, reminiscent of a certain chimera that they had sealed a long time ago. Although returning to the fight, Gressel still kept the Avenger trapped while he made the earth and rocks that were there become large projectiles. But not only that, but the coal, metals, precious stones and crystals that were deep within the earth also became projectiles, which he was planning to use against the Avenger and kill him once and for all. Note: before you tell me anything, the magical techniques that have to do with the handling of the earth element are not only limited to rock or earth, but can also manipulate other types of materials, including carbon, metal, sand, clay, precious stones, crystals, even meteorites, since these materials and others are based on earth. End of note. Gressel: say goodbye to this world, Avenger, he said as he threw all the projectiles he had created at the Phantom Avenger, who was still trapped inside those two giant rocks. All the projectiles together went towards where the aforementioned was. All the projectiles went towards where the Avenger was, as if they were bullets from a firearm. Each and every one of those materials converted into projectiles created an enormous and large layer of smoke, blocking all types of vision, but Gressel was still not satisfied with that. This had created a huge fissure where the Avenger should be. The Earth Demon did not care how deep and big that fissure was, but he cared about knowing if the Phantom Avenger was really dead, but he only ended up kneeling and without more began to breathe, somewhat agitated due to the loss of his wings and his magical wear and tear. Gressel: I was able to defeat him, now no one will get involved. He didn't finish thinking because something pierced his chest. This unbeliever looked behind him, seeing the Phantom Avenger, which he could see how some of his bones were fractured, but these were regenerated, taking Gressel by surprise, which tried to hit but ended up losing both of his arms, courtesy of Issei's chain, which was still impregnated with hellfire. Avenger. Ghosts. Do you know something? He said in the same tone of voice as before while grabbing Gressel's head and pulling him closer to him. Gressel. Why don't you rot, you idiot, he said angrily as he tried to regenerate his two lost arms, but for some reason he couldn't. He even tried to create an arm out of rocks and couldn't either. He ended up realizing that he had no escape. Avenger. Ghost. I woke up a while ago, but I'm still very hungry and your soul looks delicious, he said, making Gressel open his eyes in surprise, while the Avenger only opened his mouth. Gressel tried not to look at the Avenger's face, but since he had him held tightly by the head, he couldn't do anything. He just had to wait for the Avenger he so underestimated to kill him once and for all. A few moments later, the Earth Demon's soul left his body to only be devoured by the Phantom Avenger, while Gressel's body only turned to ashes, while the clothes he was previously wearing ended up on the ground. Those clothes were noticed by the Avenger, who did not hesitate to put on the vest and pants, as well as the shoes and gloves, although when he put them on the clothes began to burn and melt, but despite that his current clothing seemed as if he were adapting to the fires of hell. Note. He is dressed like the image shown after the video, end of note. On the part of the Avenger, he only remained still where he was, but out of nowhere, the motorcycle that belonged to Issei's father appeared on the spot. The Avenger only wrapped the chain around his left shoulder and his right side. After having done this, he did not hesitate and approached the vehicle to just get on, but the moment he did so, the motorcycle had changed radically. The Phantom Avenger simply proceeded to drive towards the city of Kuo, but in the middle of his trip, he left a line of hellish fire while burning some things around him along the way. However, when he was in one of the streets of the city of Kuo, in an alley, he managed to hear the scream of a girl that made the Avenger stop and get off his motorcycle. Once he did that, he alone went to the alley to see how a thief was robbing a 17-year-old girl, brown hair tied in two ponytails on different sides, green eyes and pink glasses. The girl tried to defend herself, but it was of no use because the thief had a 9mm, but that robbery was prevented by Mephistopheles' pet, making a very strange but at the same time terrifying noise, calling the attention of both the thief and the girl, making both look in the direction of that noise, seeing the skeletal figure. Both of them were scared when they saw that, but the girl had some hope that that thing would save her, and her prayers were answered, since our Avenger had made a movement with his head in a direction as a sign for her to leave. Thank you, she said in a grateful tone as she left that alley. Avenger. Ghost. You are guilty, he said seriously, pointing his index finger at the thief and approaching him to then grab him by his clothes and lift him up. Avenger. Ghost. Look me in the eyes, he said, but the thief only shot all the bullets at the Avenger, but none of those bullets did anything to him. Avenger. Ghost. Your soul is stained with the blood of innocents, feel their pain, he said, while the thief inevitably looked into the Avenger's eyes and then saw all the bad things he had done. But by the time he was done, his eyes ended up burning out while he ended up in a comatose state. The Avenger only threw him to the ground, while the thief's skin turned pale to the point that he could not continue breathing. But not only did that happen, but also the thief's own soul was destroyed by the Avenger's action. The Avenger, once he finished with that criminal, only returned to his motorcycle to continue searching for guilty souls, but on his entire way he found nothing or no one, but without him realizing it, little by little it was dawning, but by the time he noticed that it was dawning, he continued driving to a cemetery that was in the city of Kuo, the same cemetery where Issei's father was buried. But when he was somewhat close to where the chestnut's father's grave was, but in the middle of the road his motorcycle began to fail, leaving him no choice but to stop in the middle of the road. However, in doing so, he had fallen off the motorcycle while the sun was rising in all its splendor. Although the vehicle was beginning to recover its original appearance, losing all modifications as well as the infernal flames. Although on the part of the Phantom Avenger, for some reason he began to scream in a distorted way. However, the hellfire that previously surrounded his entire body, but especially his skull, was disappearing while he was beginning to recover flesh, skin and hair, until he ended up recovering everything that the hellfire had consumed when his transformation occurred. Issei. He screamed while he felt as if all his skin was burning, while he tried to endure that terrible sensation, crawling until he was in front of his father's grave. Issei. Hiroshi Hayadu, beloved father, he said, trying to endure the pain he felt to just rest his head on the ground. However, someone ended up putting the tip of a shovel near Issei's face so that he opened his eyes and saw a man of about 55 or more years of age with a hat that was covering him from the sun. Good morning, idiot, said the man, spitting some saliva while Issei just ended up fainting. Change of scene. Now we see how Issei was waking up on a bed, although when he did he felt like his entire throat was super dry, but on a small table near him, he managed to see 5 glasses of water, and without even hesitating, he quickly drank the 5 glasses of water, although when he finished he realized that he was not at home, so without further ado, he leaves the place where he was. However, when he got up for some reason he felt very weak, as if there were several 50-kilo weights on each limb of his body, preventing him from moving, but with some effort he was able to get out of that place. Once he got out he saw that he was in a cemetery, the same cemetery where his father's grave was, and how he realized it was because of a statue of an angel that he recognized instantly. Although in the distance he could see the man he managed to see before he fainted, the brown-haired man only approached that man who he assumed was the cemetery caretaker, but the caretaker also managed to see the brown-haired man at the distance he was at, so without wasting time the two proceeded to approach, but when they were a few meters away, the caretaker said something considerable. "Caretaker? Are you okay, kid?" he said asked seriously, looking at the brown-haired boy. "Issei. If you say that because I feel as if my skin has been consumed by fire, well my skull was on fire. Yes, I'm fine, thanks for asking, and also for the water. Have you seen my motorcycle?" he said, noticing that he had trouble walking but could still stand. Well, the caretaker just smiled at that. "Issei. Did I say something funny?" he said asked something serious looking at the caretaker since he was not in a very good mood. "Caretaker. Ironic, here we are fans of irony," he said still with his smile, and then said. "Caretaker. Your motorcycle is there, in that shed," he said, pointing to a place near where Issei was sleeping. "Issei. Thank you," he said gratefully and turning around to go towards that shed, but there was a question in his mind. "But in that?" "Caretaker. It's normal," he said, making Issei stop and turn to look at him. "Issei. What's normal?" he said asked confused looking at the caretaker. "Caretaker. If you're asking if your bike is normal, it is," he said while Issei was surprised since that was the question he had in mind a few moments ago. "Caretaker. And to answer your other questions, you weren't asleep last night, everything that happened and you did was real and will continue to happen," he said seriously while Issei put on a serious expression. "Issei. Who are you?" he said asked seriously while discreetly forming a magic circle. "Caretaker. The question is, who are you?" he said asked pointing at Issei, who only undid the magic circle since he didn't feel any evil intentions in the man in front of him, but he just turned around to go look for his motorcycle. "Caretaker. You are the Avenger, the Phantom Avenger," he said seriously while Issei ignored him, continuing his way to the shed. "Caretaker. I suggest you get used to it will be easier, but if you want I can reserve you a place in the front row," he said with some humor while finally pointing to a part of the cemetery. Issei for his part just went to the shed, which he opened without difficulty since there was no padlock or anything that prevented him from opening it, although when he did he saw his motorcycle and without further ado proceeded to take it to leave the cemetery, although when he was about to leave the caretaker says. "Caretaker. They may not know your true face or your name, but I'm sure that tonight everyone will see you and then wait for the right moment and then kill you," he said seriously while Issei just got on his bike and tried to start it. "Caretaker. You will need my help if you want to survive," he said seriously while Issei just looked at him to say. "Issei. Once a complete stranger helped me and it didn't turn out very well, let's say," he said, managing to start his motorcycle and ready to leave. "Caretaker. By signing that contract you only condemned yourself," he said seriously while Issei only stopped in the middle of the road to turn to look at the caretaker. "Caretaker. Congratulations, now you only have a little hope," he said, still in his serious tone. "Later." "Issei. A book?" he said asked with some mockery since he expected to receive something more apart from that. "Caretaker. Listen kid, this book will tell you how you can control the Avenger's curse or at least some of its powers, if you can clearly," he said seriously while Issei was surprised by that. "Issei. What do you mean by that?" he said asked seriously wanting to know what exactly his curse was. "Caretaker. You are not the only Phantom Avenger, boy, in ancient times there were also several, and there will be more in the future if Mephistopheles is still alive," he said seriously while Issei only faced the caretaker. "Issei. I want you to tell me what happened before and also tell me how you know about Mephistopheles," he said asked seriously looking at the man who just sat down. "Caretaker. Take a seat," he said seriously and pointing to a chair in which Issei sat down to pay full attention to what he would say to the man he met. "Caretaker. The Phantom Avenger is the sole collector of Mephistopheles, the firstborn of the devil or Lucifer as you want to call him. Mephistopheles uses the Avenger to kill the demons that escape from hell, or for soul collections. However, there were some people who could control the Avenger's curse, but others only ended up in madness by not being able to control it, causing them to commit suicide," he said seriously as he looked at Issei, who only took that as a motivation to avoid falling into madness and recover his soul. "Issei. How do you know about the Phantom Avengers and Mephistopheles? He said asked somewhat seriously looking at the caretaker. Careful. Follow me he said getting up and walking, followed by Issei. They both continued walking, although Issei wanted to know where they were going, but moments later he saw how the caretaker stood in front of a grave that said, Carter Slade, may the angels guide you to heaven. Issei. Carter Slade. He said asked looking at the grave. Caretaker. A former Texas Ranger, he lived in the United States, but that was many years ago, but one day he was overcome by greed and sentenced to death by hanging, but a stranger visited him, offered him freedom, and Slade accepted. He signed a contract becoming the Phantom Avenger he said something serious and nostalgic. Issei. What does this have to do with what I asked you before? He said asked somewhat seriously looking at the caretaker. Caretaker. Before I answer that question I'll tell you about San Vincenda, a beautiful place with kind people, until one day Mephistopheles posing as a simple stranger, made them several promises one by one, consumed by greed, envy, anger and even lust, they betrayed each other, until the town of San Vincenda drowned in their own blood. Their souls were trapped in that cursed place he said seriously as he looked at Carter Slade's grave. Caretaker. But Slade was sent to San Vincenzo to collect that contract, but what he ended up finding was much more perverse than what was told. He just took the contract and fled he said seriously just to say. Caretaker. Legends say that when the contract was buried next to Slade and others say that he hid it in a place where no one would ever find it, he said seriously looking at the brown-haired man. Issei. Wait a minute, are you telling me that you know all this because of some simple legends that could be false? He said asked somewhat incredulously looking at the caretaker. Caretaker. Yes he answered as if it were the most normal thing in the world, making the brown-haired boy sweat. Caretaker. But remember this kid, sometimes legends can be real, even if you don't believe in them he said seriously looking at the brown-haired boy. Issei. By the way, do you have any idea what could have happened to my clothes? He said asked realizing that the clothes he was wearing were not his, but the Gressel clothes that the Avenger borrowed. Caretaker. Let me tell you that the clothes of humans cannot withstand the hellish fire that surrounds the Avenger, but the clothes that the demons are made of can, but that does not mean that they will burn or melt. Although they will return to their normal state when you become human again, since I have heard that they regenerate he said to the surprise of the brown-haired boy he had no other option but to stay with the clothes he was wearing, or one of these days, he would be naked in the middle of the street if he became the Avenger. Note. I made this up myself since it would be anyone's idea that human clothes could withstand a fire from another dimension that would be hell or the underworld, however they could withstand it, but this is my opinion and view, not yours. Caretaker. But remember this kid, during the day you will be normal like all humans, but at night when evil comes out, you will become the Phantom Avenger he said seriously as he walked followed by Issei. Issei. Do you know if there is anyone else besides Carter Slade who is an Avenger? He said asked following the caretaker. Caretaker. You see, Slade is not the last Avenger, but the second to last the last Avenger there was 97 years ago, but I don't know who he is he said seriously, while Issei had no more questions to say. Issei. I see he said seriously and just walked towards his motorcycle. Caretaker. Where are you going? He said asked seriously looking at the boy. Issei. I have to go study, I've missed a lot, and I think a couple of equations will help me forget that I'm the debt collector for Lucifer's son, he said with some humor, although he knew what he said was real. Caretaker. Why did you do it, why did you sign the contract? He said asked watching the brown-haired boy get on his motorcycle. Issei. I did it for someone besides I was just a kid he said seriously starting his bike. Caretaker. What did you get after selling your soul? He said asked still seriously approaching the boy. Issei. Unfortunately, he replied seriously as he made his way home, although he remembered all the humiliations and mockery he suffered. At the Kuo Academy. We see how our brown-haired boy was in his class while he was reviewing everything he could remember of what happened last night, but let's rewind what Issei did before he arrived at the academy. When Issei left the cemetery and arrived at his house, he took a quick shower and then got dressed in the Kuo Academy uniform, although while he was getting dressed he was brushing his teeth. After he got dressed, brushed his teeth and fell on the floor about 3 times, he grabbed his briefcase to go to the academy, although before leaving he had hidden the book that the caretaker had given him when he was at the cemetery. Once he had done that he got on his motorcycle which was parked near his apartment. However, halfway along the way he must have taken a different direction than he was used to, because apparently there was an accident or something like that, but when he arrived at the academy, he ended up receiving a big scolding from the janitor, and luckily for him he let him in. Once inside he ran faster than lightning towards his classroom, although he received another big scolding from the teacher who was giving the class, but they still allowed him to enter. And that was what happened before Issei arrived at the academy. Right now we see how the brown-haired boy was eating in the academy cafeteria because he hadn't had any breakfast, but while he was eating he cursed himself as if he had done something stupid. Issei. Damn it, I had the chance to ask him if he knew about Blackheart, but I forgot, damn it, he thought while cursing himself. I take back what I said, in reality he did make a stupid mistake, since he could have asked the cemetery caretaker if he knew anything about Blackheart or his companions, but the tranquility that Issei had was interrupted by a 17-year-old boy who sat next to Issei and was accompanied by two other boys who were standing behind him. On the part of the boy who sat with Issei, he had an arrogant and superior expression just like his henchman. Of course the other students saw that and began to record with their cell phones what for them was going to be the humiliation towards the supposed perverted beast. Issei. What do you want? He said asked seriously since he wasn't in a very good mood that same day. Boy 1. We want to have fun with our punching bags, can't we? He said with an arrogant tone and smiled that Issei ignored and said. Issei. I suggest you leave, I'm not in the mood to put up with you today, he said seriously as he continued eating his food. Boy 1. Who do you think you are, idiot? He didn't finish speaking as Issei stuck the plastic fork in his hand and then grabbed him by the face and smashed it several times against the table, not caring that everyone saw that in disbelief. Issei. I told you, idiot, I'm not in the mood today, he said seriously, revealing how the boy lost 2 teeth while blood came out of his nose which was broken. Boy. 2. Damn, he said angrily going towards Issei with the intention of hitting him. But the brown-haired boy easily dodged the blow to just grab his arm, and without even having mercy or even hesitating, he broke it making the crunch of his bones be heard while he let out a great cry of pain, but Issei did not fall short and with a kick that hit him in the face, he left him on the ground while blood came out of his mouth. Issei. Do you also want to go out like your friends? He said asked seriously looking at the last boy while emanating an aura of terror that made him piss himself. Boy. 3. Mom, he exclaimed in fear and ran out of the cafeteria. Issei. What are you looking at? He said seriously looking at the others in the cafeteria who were scared as the brown-haired boy looked at them since it was the first time they saw that. But Issei managed to compose himself and realized what he had done. His right hand had some blood as well as his right cheek. The brunette without even saying anything just ran out of the cafeteria and once he left, the other students proceeded to check the condition of the two wounded. But Issei. On our chestnut's part, he had fled from the Kuo Academy, he had to climb the academy's large fence to escape, although it was not difficult for him, since he was good at climbing things, but leaving that aside. Our chestnut, once he left the academy, had run to a place far from said building. Once he was far away he was wondering why he did that, why he hurt those two boys, and apart from that, he wanted to know why he enjoyed it, but then he hears Mephistopheles' voice. Mephistopheles. What's wrong, Issei? Do you feel sorry for having hurt those boys or did you enjoy doing it? He said asked with a smile looking at the brown-haired boy. Issei. You, what have you done to me? I would never have hurt them. He said asked seriously looking angrily at Mephistopheles. Mephistopheles. Please Issei, don't lie to a demon, after all we are the masters of deception and lies, he said approaching the brown-haired boy and then touching the brown-haired boy's chest. Mephistopheles. I haven't changed anything about you, Issei, just the opposite, I only improved you by giving you my best weapon, but what you did in that academy was due to the hatred and anger that you have been accumulating since those humiliations and mockery towards you began, he said calmly making Issei surprised by that. Mephistopheles. But tell me Issei, what did you feel at that moment? He said asked looking at the brown-haired boy. Issei. I felt satisfaction, superiority and wanting more, he said showing his true face, but realizing what he said he only shook his head to say. Issei. No, that's not true, what I said is not true, he said seriously looking at Mephistopheles. Mephistopheles. You can say it as many times as you want, Issei, but between you and me, I know very well that you enjoyed hurting those boys, he said with a smile. Issei. Just get to the point, why did you come to see me? He said seriously looking at the firstborn of the Mao Lucifer. Mephistopheles. I have come to talk to you about something, and also to give you a proposal that you might like to hear, he said, looking at the brown-haired boy who just became serious because he felt that this proposal was not good at all, or maybe it was. Chapter 3. I have my enemies, but also my allies. Authors Pav. We are in a small restaurant. In this restaurant we can see how waiter was carrying 2 teas on a tray, as well as 2 chocolate cakes. This waiter continued on his way to a table that was out in the open, but at that table were Issei and Mephistopheles himself sitting in front of each other. Waiter. Here's your order, he said while giving each of them a cup and a cake. Waiter. Have a good meal, he said while receiving a nod from Mephistopheles, and without further ado he left. Mephistopheles. Without a doubt, I must admit that humans know how to make good tea, he said, smelling the tea, then taking a sip, describing it as delicious. Issei. I don't think you brought me here to have tea, or did you, Mephistopheles? He said, asked seriously, looking distrustfully at Lucifer's firstborn. Mephistopheles. No, of course not. I just wanted to get you to take that serious look off your face by inviting you to have a cup of tea and of course, a delicious cake too, he said, cutting a piece of cake with a fork and eating it. Issei. What? Now we are girls who have tea? He said, asked something serious and with some mockery, while Mephistopheles gave a sigh, a little tired. Mephistopheles. Drinking tea doesn't make you very much of a woman or a man, Issei. There are men in the world who drink tea either for pleasure or for elegance. Saying that only women drink tea and that if a man drinks it, he's a woman, is very childish, he said in a calm tone, taking a sip of his tea, while Issei remained silent. Issei didn't say anything, he just looked at his cup of tea, distrusting that Mephisto had ordered the waiter to put something in it. He even chose to look around, seeing how some other person and also a couple were having lunch in the place. Mephistopheles. You don't have to suspect or distrust my Issei, your tea and your cake have nothing, and the people here are human. It's a little silly that you think I'm going to hurt you, he said in a calm but clear tone. That wasn't enough for the brown-haired boy to trust him. Issei. Do you really think I'm going to trust what you say, Mephistopheles? I know very well that you are the damn firstborn of Lucifer and older brother of that old bastard Rissivum. Who doesn't tell me that you are the same or perhaps worse than them? He said, asked in a serious and angry tone, but in a low voice so as not to attract the attention of others. Mephistopheles. Yes, you have a great point, Issei, but I am different from my father and little brother, he said in a calm tone, remembering all the most morbid atrocities that his two relatives did. Issei. Yeah, sure, as if I was really going to fall for that, he said seriously as he stood up ready to leave. Mephistopheles. Would you let me tell you something, Issei? He said, asked, making the brown-haired boy stop. Issei just turned to look at the old man and said. Issei. What do you want to tell me? He said, asked seriously, but for some reason, he had a small interest in hearing what Mephistopheles was going to say. Mephistopheles. Please take a seat, he said, pointing to the chair, so Issei walked over to the chair and sat down. Mephistopheles. Coughing. Hundreds and hundreds of years ago, there was a demon who was on the verge of death because of an enemy ambush. Obviously that demon was very powerful, but it wasn't enough to finish off all of his enemies, he said with a slightly nostalgic tone, and then took a sip of his tea. Meanwhile, Issei had instantly realized where Mephistopheles was going, but decided to wait for the old man to finish telling everything he had to say. Mephistopheles. The demon tried for several hours to make them lose their way in the place, which he luckily achieved, and then tried to clean up his tracks so they wouldn't follow him. But because of his wounds and how exhausted he was, he ended up falling unconscious on a dirt road, thinking that his life was over there, he said, while drinking the little tea he had left, and then proceeded to eat the cake. Mephistopheles. But that did not happen. The demon, disoriented and with a terrible pain throughout his body, woke up in a very hard and uncomfortable bed. After a few minutes the demon completely recovered, then wondered where he was. He looked around, being in a room made of oak wood in the process of decomposition, as well as a window that was near where he was lying, being able to see a river a few kilometers away, he said, still with a nostalgic tone, finishing drinking all his tea. Mephistopheles. But that demon had quickly created a magic circle in the direction of a door that had been opened. But the moment he did so, he had been incredulous and enchanted at the same time. She was a beautiful woman with shoulder-length hair, the color was a beautiful somewhat dark brown, and her eyes were also brown, but this brown was brighter and lighter, the opposite of her hair color. But even though she was disheveled and wearing a simple one-piece dress that was a little dirty and old, she was undoubtedly the most beautiful and splendid woman he had ever seen in his entire life. Not even the women of the underworld compared to her, and she would undoubtedly be the envy of all those devils if she lived in better conditions, he said with that nostalgic tone, while Issei remained silent. Mephistopheles. That demon had made the magic circle that was in his hand disappear, but for some reason that woman remained calm and silent, as if she had not cared about what he did, and just walked towards him slowly. Once the woman was close to the demon, she only bent down to leave a bowl with warm water and some bandages on the floor on top of the bowl. She slowly and carefully proceeded to remove the blood-filled bandages that the demon had on almost his entire body, she said as she stopped eating her cake, since there was no more. Mephistopheles. The room was immersed in a slightly uncomfortable silence, but for the woman it seemed that something relaxed her that the demon missed after all. He thought and believed that all women were pure chatterboxes, but no, she did not say a word at any time. But the demon could not help but think that those fingers that touched him were so soft and perfect. Without holding on a moment longer, the demon asked that woman her name, to which she replied saying Ines with a calm and relaxed tone, she said, still with that nostalgic tone, but with a small smile formed on her face. Mephistopheles. The demon for a moment thought she was someone strange, but that motivated him to get to know her better. So without hesitating a single second more he said, "Mephistopheles, that's my name," said that demon with a small burn in his cheeks. He said still with that small smile, while Issei remained silent but was still much more than incredulous. "Issei. I am serious that I didn't know what to say until." Mephistopheles nods. Mephistopheles. "That's right, Issei, and even if you don't believe me, I fell in love with Ines, a human of flesh and blood," he said in his calm tone. "It's a lie, a deception." The voice with a dark tone said in Issei's head, which made him react by looking around thinking it was someone who was playing a joke on him. But there was no one, but he put it aside to think about what Mephistopheles had told him. "Mephistopheles. So it's already starting," he said with a slightly serious tone, drawing the brown-haired boy's attention. "Issei. What are you talking about?" he said asked seriously thinking that it was he who told him that, but it was too stupid to think that since why would Mephistopheles tell him something like what he heard? But what was happening to him, between the voice he heard, what Mephistopheles had told him and having different questions in his head that didn't let him think clearly. Mephistopheles. Try to think calmly and slowly, Issei. You could end up having a severe problem because of everything you have inside your head, he said when he noticed how Issei couldn't think well and could only end up getting a severe headache. Mephistopheles. I'm sure you're wondering how I, a demon and being the son of Lucifer himself, could have fallen in love with a human, if our love was true or false, if I forced her to do things against her will, he said, while Issei slowly began to think more clearly and calmly. Mephistopheles. You can believe me or not, Issei, I leave that to your discretion. I'm just being honest with you, he said in a calm tone, while Issei was wondering that. Issei. Why? Why did you tell me that? He said asked seriously wanting to know the answer. Mephistopheles. I don't see the need to lie to you, Issei, after all you could say that we are partners. He said asked looking at the brown-haired boy, making him remember something. Issei. What is that proposal about? When we were in that alley, he said asked remembering that proposal that he was supposedly going to like. Mephistopheles. First of all, Issei, I want you to tell me how high is the hatred and resentment you have towards all factions, including your sisters and your own mother? He said asked looking at the brown-haired boy who was very surprised by that question. Issei. What does that have to? He didn't finish speaking because Mephistopheles interrupted him. Mephistopheles. Don't try to change the subject, Issei, be honest like I have been with you, answering me that simple question, he said, making Issei move his right leg while sighing a little irritated and annoyed, without having any idea of saying it or not. Mephistopheles. Well, if you don't want to tell me, don't do it, he said, but this time with a disappointed tone. Issei. What do you mean by that? Mephistopheles, he said asked seriously looking at the old man. Mephistopheles. I hope you haven't forgotten about the Phantom Avenger, Issei, inside you have one of my best creations. But of course, every creation has its flaw, and the Avenger's is simple. With the passage of time both your soul and your mind, the Avenger will sooner or later corrupt them until you go crazy, he said in a serious tone, while Issei was a little surprised to hear that. Mephistopheles. And the voice you heard a few moments ago was the same Avenger who with the passage of time will make you go crazier and crazier. And of course, have suicidal thoughts, he said seriously while Issei remained silent. He knew that the Avenger would drive him mad because the caretaker of that cemetery had told him so. But he had no idea and at no time did the caretaker tell him that the Avenger would corrupt his soul. Issei. You lied to me, you told me that he didn't finish speaking because Mephistopheles interrupted him. Mephistopheles. At no time did I lie to you, Issei, I hit it, he said something serious while Issei hit the table, drawing the attention of those who were having lunch outdoors and those who were inside the restaurant. Issei. Because of you, right now I'm in trouble for having hit those kids, and he didn't finish speaking because he was interrupted again. Mephistopheles. Those boys were hurt as a result of the hatred, anger and resentment that you have inside you. The first manifestations of the Avenger would only be voices inside your head and nightmares, maybe even illusions, but the Avenger is just beginning with your soul, Issei, he said seriously, while Issei contained his fury to hit Mephistopheles to just say. Issei. How do I avoid that? He said asked with a serious and angry tone to avoid going crazy. Mephistopheles. There are only two ways, the first is to complete your deal obviously. The second is to control the Avenger, but it is something that very few achieved, and those who tried it went crazy and ended up committing suicide, he said with a carefree tone while Issei upon hearing that, sighed irritated knowing that he would have to fulfill his part of the deal to avoid going crazy. Issei. By the way, what about the proposal? He said asked seriously looking at the old man. Mephistopheles. I'm sorry, Issei, but I'll tell you another time, for now I recommend that you run, he said something that completely missed the brown-haired boy. But Mephistopheles pointed in a direction, more specifically to a television inside the restaurant that could be seen thanks to a large window near them. Issei approached the window so he could see a little of the television showing the news channel, something normal, nothing important. However, there was something that alerted the brown-haired boy, seeing how in a video he was at the Kuo Academy beating up the two boys who were bothering him and scaring the last one who was left. However, when I read the title of the report, it made me very upset and angry because it said, "Academy student went crazy and attacked two students." He wanted to know why the title was like that if he alone defended himself from his abusers. Until he remembered that he had the entire Kuo Academy against him. It was very stupid of him to think that someone from the academy could help him in the situation he was currently in. But he still continued watching television, seeing how they interviewed different students and teachers. They even interviewed Azazel himself, who was the director of the Kuo Academy. He didn't need to hear what each of them said, he more or less had an idea of the lies they were going to tell about him so that he wouldn't return to the academy. But it was a mistake to have stood there because without expecting it, he had been surrounded by some policemen, each of whom had a .38 caliber revolver. Police point 1. Put your hands behind your head and kneel, he exclaimed seriously while Issei saw that he had no choice. So without resisting, he put his hands behind his head and knelt down while an officer approached him to simply handcuff him. However, Issei, still looking at the window, saw a woman inside the restaurant with a landline phone in her hands, being the one responsible for calling the police. Issei was forced to get up and then be taken to one of the police patrol cars that were nearby, but the moment he got up, he saw that Mephistopheles was no longer there, assuming that he had left before or after the officers had appeared. Change of scene. Right now we are in one of the Kuo police headquarters. In this headquarters we will focus on Issei, who was in an interrogation room sitting while in front of him there was a metal table. The brown-haired boy was looking around, although he was a little surprised by the form they had given him, which had some questions that he had answered previously. But he had directed his gaze in front of him, seeing a large mirror, but he knew well that behind that glass, there could be 2 or maybe 3 policemen. However, his sight focused on a door through which 2 men between 31 and 36 years old entered. "Issei Haidu, right?" asked the first officer taking a seat in front of the brown-haired boy, as well as his partner. "Issei." "Exactly," he said in a somewhat serious and cutting tone as he settled into the chair. "Joe. I'm Agent Kimball Cho, this is my partner Agent Wayne Rigsby," he said in a somewhat serious tone introducing himself and his friend. "Issei. Let's get to the point, okay?" he said in a serious but also angry tone. "Joe. Okay, did you do this?" he asked, showing on his cell phone the recording of him beating up those kids at the academy. "Issei. Yes, I did it," he said with a serious and annoyed tone, knowing that it would be completely useless and stupid to lie. "Rigsby. Why? We've seen your grades and you have high marks, plus we've seen your motorcycle jump. Plus you have no history of violence or anything like that, why beat those kids like that when you have a promising future?" he asked seriously, having that question since he was assigned this. Issei. "Well, today like every day, I didn't wake up with all the joy and motivation in the world, and for that reason I did that unconsciously. I had no idea what I had done until I realized," he lied halfway, since he partly accepted that he had done that because of the anger he had inside, but he didn't say that those boys were bothering him because if he did, he would only have more and more problems than he already has. Issei. "I'm guilty, okay, it would be stupid of me to lie to them, after all there were many witnesses at the scene, as well as the recordings showing the facts," he said with a somewhat serious tone, knowing that he had no kind of salvation to avoid going to prison. "Rigsby. Issei, if those boys did something to you," then he didn't finish speaking because the brown-haired boy interrupted him. Issei. "Nobody bothered me, yes, the crazy one was always and always was me. Many students at the academy will agree with that, and in hell, I would even do it again. Do you really think I feel guilty or feel bad for what I did? Of course not, I enjoyed it a lot," he said with a mocking expression and a smile full of joy. After all, he truly enjoyed what he did. Both agents didn't say anything. Rigsby just got up from his chair to stand behind Issei and say. "Rigsby. Issei Haidu, you are under arrest for aggravated violence. You have the right to remain silent, anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney, if you cannot afford an attorney, the court will appoint one for you," he said while arresting the brunette. Issei didn't say anything, he knew very well that he didn't stand a chance against Kuo Academy. Rigsby had assigned a policeman to take Issei to his cell, the officer didn't refuse and took the brunette away, while Rigsby and Cho watched as Issei was taken to his cell. "Rigsby. What do you think, Cho?" he asked looking at his partner. "Joe. He's hiding something." Nobody wakes up angry and then explodes out of nowhere for no reason. "There must be a reasonable explanation for why he exploded," he said in a serious tone as he walked towards his office. "Rigsby. You're right, those kids must have been the trigger, but what did they say to him that they ended up receiving that kind of beating? He said surprised following his partner and also going to his office. Joe. We'll know that later, for now let's look more closely at the recordings. Maybe we'll find the real reason why Issei exploded like that, he said seriously as he continued on his way. But Issei. We can see how Issei had recently entered his cell, the officer who guided him obviously locked his cell. Moments later he left, leaving Issei looking at the inside of his cell. Issei just sat on what would become his new bed. He felt it was very hard, but he didn't give it much thought after all. He was going to have that same mattress depending on where he was going, to a prison or some other similar place. Issei. Sons of hitches, he said with some hatred to everyone at the Kuo Academy while he lay down. Issei. Sigh, I never thought I would end up in a place like this, he said with a defeated tone, knowing that he would go to jail one way or another. Even if he escaped using his magic, the least he wanted was to live his entire life being a fugitive. Issei sat on the padded mat for a moment, only to take off his uniform, or at least his shirt, to use it as a pillow. Without saying a single word, he proceeded to fall asleep, although it took him a few minutes to find the perfect position to sleep without discomfort, until he succeeded. Change of scene. After several hours, we can see how Issei was sleeping in that cell. However, the brown-haired boy was sweating and moving from one side to the other. The wake-up abruptly touching his face, knowing that he had returned to the real world, he only sighed in relief until the light that hit his face had been covered by something, or rather someone, being Agent Cho himself. Joe. A nightmare? He said, something serious, looking at the brown-haired boy who was wiping the sweat from his forehead. Issei. Yes, but it's different from the ones I'm more or less used to, he said, remembering that this nightmare was not about his contract with Mephistopheles or something like that, but rather it was about the same phantom avenger that lies within him. Issei. What are you doing here? He said, looking at the agent. Joe. You have visitors, he said seriously, moving to the side, letting his mother and sisters see him. Joe. You have 10 minutes, he said, leaving, but Issei quickly gets up to just say. Issei. Agent Cho, wait, I don't know them, please do me a favor and take them out of here, okay? He said while the brunettes were surprised by what he said, while Cho ignored what the brunette said. Issei. I don't know them, please take them, and she's gone, shit, he said and exclaimed angrily at the last thing, while the three approached. Issei's son, why did you say that? She didn't finish speaking because the brown-haired boy interrupted her. Issei. You are nothing to me now, do me a favor and go, will you? He said seriously, lying down on the mattress ready to sleep again, however. Mocha. But anyway, we can't leave you here. We can make you. She doesn't finish speaking because the brown-haired boy interrupts her. Issei. Make me, Mocha. Tell me, from the way I see it, the entire academy is against me. Everyone is going to be very happy to know that I, the perverted beast, went to prison, he said with an annoyed and angry tone, getting up and getting a little closer to the three of them. Issei. Or did you forget the lies you spread about me? He said, with a tone full of displeasure, looking at his sisters with disgust, while Haru did not understand that. Haru. Mocha, Akemi, what did they do to your brother? He said, seeing how both had lowered their heads in a sign of sadness and regret. Issei. Let me tell you, but more clearly this time, you see, Mrs. Suzuki, after my father deceived you. Weeks later, your daughters Mocha and Akemi have been humiliating me and making fun of me for a long time, he said seriously, remembering the different humiliations he received from both brunettes. Issei. But as time went by, they both figured out how to make my life impossible. Until during my stay at Kuo Academy, they spread rumors that I was a first-class pervert and that I spied on them when they showered, he said seriously, remembering that it is one of the reasons why he has the entire Kuo Academy against him, while both twins remained silent. Haru. Did you really do that? I ask you a question, were you really capable of saying such things about your own brother? She said, seriously and disappointed of her daughters, who only nodded in sadness without being able to avoid shedding tears. Issei. I want you to leave, I have nothing else to talk to you about, he said seriously as he lay down again. Haru. But son, what about this? Are you really going to stay here? He said, thinking that he couldn't bear to see his baby in a prison. Issei. That's right, I'm going to stay here, I'll take responsibility for what I've done, he said in a carefree tone as he settled down to sleep. Akemi. Ataudo, we can help you be free, but she didn't finish speaking because Issei interrupted her. Issei. I said it and I'll say it again, I'll take responsibility for what I've done. Besides, I don't plan on accepting their help, much less from demons or any other supernatural being, he said seriously, settling into his bed. Akemi. But Ataudo, she couldn't finish speaking, since Cho had appeared along with the same officer, escorted Issei to his cell. Joe. The 10 minutes are up, please leave, he said seriously, while Akemi just clenched her fists, however. Haru. Okay, we're leaving now. Akemi, Mocha, let's go, she said seriously while both twins wanted to stay, but they knew they couldn't do it, so they had no choice but to listen to their mother. The three brunettes left while Issei just gave a relaxed sigh, but for some reason Cho and the officer were still present. Joe. Family problems. He said seriously looking at the brown-haired boy who only looked at him to say. Issei. Yes, you could say so, he said in a somewhat serious tone sitting on the mattress as he tried to sleep but couldn't. Issei. Can you tell me the time? He said looking at Joe, who only took out a cell phone from inside his suit. Joe. It's 7:45 p.m. he said while Issei just nodded to start stretching, while Joe looked to both sides to say. Joe. Open the cell, he said to the officer behind him, doing what the agent told him while Issei was surprised. Issei. What are you doing? Shouldn't I stay here and wait until the day of my trial? He said surprised, looking at Joe while the officer opened the cell. Joe. Well, you were talking to your mother and sisters, someone paid your bail. The court judge allowed it, but you are forbidden to leave the city or you will be arrested, and she also gave us a few days to investigate your case, and if we don't find anything to defend you, you will be sent to prison, she said with a serious tone, while Issei was surprised. Issei. Case. But if I don't, he didn't finish speaking because Joe interrupted him. Joe. Listen carefully, Issei. Prison is not a nice place for someone your age to be there, and I don't think you have psychological or mental problems for you to go to an asylum or a psychiatric hospital. You're still a child, and you also have a promising future. Do you really want to spend the rest of your life in a prison to prove your innocence? He said seriously looking at the brown-haired boy, who thought for a few moments about what Joe said to only respond with a. Issei. Yes, I am willing to prove my innocence. But even if I prove it, it doesn't change what I did at the academy, he said seriously, standing up and looking at the agent. Joe. We'll figure that out, for now you'll have to cooperate with us. We'll contact you from time to time so you can answer some things, but now I'll let you go home, he said seriously, to which Issei just left the cell, and once outside the officer proceeded to close it. Issei. I thank you for what you are doing for me, he said with a somewhat grateful tone, while Joe said nothing. Joe. You don't have to thank me, it's my job. Who you really should thank is the person who paid your bail, he said, making Issei nod his head, but he wanted to know who was responsible for paying his bail. Joe. Come follow me, I'll get your belongings back, he said, walking, followed by the brown-haired boy. Joe. By the way, don't do what you did in the interrogation room again, because if not, they would have assigned us this. You wouldn't be free right now, he said seriously looking at the brunette who just lowered his head. Issei. It's okay, it's just that I got carried away thinking that I was alone in this, he said in a somewhat serious but also sad tone. Joe. Not now, keep that in mind, he said as he continued on his way. Issei. One question, are you the good cop or the bad cop? At first I thought I didn't finish speaking as Joe said. Joe. Shut up or I'll make you go back to your cell, he said something serious, while the brown-haired boy decided to listen to him. Issei followed Joe to a part of the headquarters where he had to sign some papers to get his cell phone, his wallet and the keys to his motorcycle back, being those the only things of value he had. After that he was guided to the exit of the headquarters, but once outside, he was surprised to see Chuck standing there, freezing cold. Issei. Chuck, what are you doing here? He said surprised seeing and approaching the man he met just one day. Chuck. Agent Joe called me, he said you were arrested, he said something serious approaching Issei, to give him a slap on the back of the neck. Issei. Why did you do that? He said a little annoyed and rubbing the back of his neck since that blow hurt him. Chuck. Next time it will be stronger, now we are going to our house boy, I apologize for everything my son did, Agent Joe. I will take care of giving him a punishment, he said, grabbing Issei by the arm so that they both left the place, while Joe saw that with his stoic face but put it aside and entered the headquarters. But let's move on to Chuck and Issei who were walking at a hurried pace away from the headquarters. They continued walking aimlessly for a few minutes until Chuck saw a pizzeria near where they were. Chuck. Let's go to that pizzeria, I'm a little hungry and I'm sure you are too, he said heading in the direction of the pizzeria, while Issei hesitated to do so, but his stomach had growled as a sign that he was hungry, so he had no choice but to follow Chuck. By the time they both entered the pizzeria, they just took a seat near a large window, a moment later a waiter stood in front of them both to serve them. Waiter. Good evening, what are you going to order? He said looking at both of them, while Issei didn't know what to order, but Chuck says. Chuck. We want the medium mozzarella cheese pizza, as a drink I want a Coca-Cola, and you Issei? He said looking at the brown-haired girl. Issei. Also a Coke. Waiter. Okay, I'll bring your order right away, he said after writing down what they both ordered in a small notebook and then leaving. Chuck. Gosh, I didn't think it would be this cold tonight, he said while warming his hands that were very cold, but his gaze went to Issei, who was only wearing his academy uniform. Chuck. Are you cold, Issei? If you want, I can. He didn't finish speaking because the brown-haired boy interrupted him. Issei. No need, I'm fine, he said with a slightly negative tone, since his body was more or less adapted to cold climates. Chuck. Sigh, okay, he said with a slightly tired tone. After a few minutes, the waiter had arrived with the pizza and drinks. Both ate in silence, although it was a lie that shame was eating away at Issei. The brown-haired boy tried to eat as little as possible, which made Chuck laugh a little. Chuck. You don't have to be ashamed, Issei. Go ahead, eat as much as you want, he said with a smile while Issei was unsure, but because of how hungry he was, he didn't hesitate for a second and ate without any shame or embarrassment. After a few minutes, both of them finished eating to just relax for a moment. However, Issei turned his gaze towards a television which was showing the same report of him beating up those boys. But this time revealing his identity as a student and stunt motorcyclist, although the brown-haired boy could hear some murmurs to which he turned to look, seeing how several people were talking behind his back, but still he didn't say or do anything, he just stood there still until. Issei. Can I ask you a question, Chuck? He said looking at the aforementioned who was drinking his soda. Chuck. What's your question, Issei? He said leaving his drink on the table, while paying attention to what the brown-haired boy was going to ask him. Issei. Why did you pay my bail? We are strangers, and at no point did I ask you, and I would never have done it, he said wanting to know why the man he met yesterday paid his bail. Chuck. I don't know. Maybe the guilt of leaving you in a cell wouldn't have let me sleep and would always be on my conscience, he said in a somewhat carefree tone, and grabbing his soda to finish what little was left. Issei. Nobody would have done that, much less if they saw on the news that that person did something bad, he said something serious, while listening to people's murmurs and watching the news. Chuck. I wasn't easily convinced, Issei. I always think that for every action someone does, there's something behind it. I feel the same in your case, he said, finishing drinking his entire soda and leaving the empty bottle on the table. Issei. No wonder someone scammed you, he said in a somewhat mocking tone, while Chuck just made a face of obviousness. Chuck. It happened to me a few times, but so far I haven't been scammed yet, he said with a carefree tone, while Issei had a poker face. Issei. But anyway, thanks Chuck. Maybe if it had been my mother who paid my bail, I would have stayed in that cell, he said in a serious tone, since he didn't want to have anything to do with her or his sisters. Chuck. Family problems. He said looking at the brown-haired boy who sighed with some irritation. Issei. Since time immemorial. Chuck. Have you tried, I don't know, fix things with them? He said while Issei just clenched his fists angrily. Issei. Let me tell you this, Chuck, my mother has been ignoring me as if I didn't exist since I was a child. She is just now realizing my existence and what my sisters have been doing to me for a long time. Speaking of them, both of them made my life impossible before and now, being the ones to blame for why I went to the damn jail. Well, my father, he had his mistakes, but he learned how to correct them. He was willing to fix everything he did, but he died when I was 11 years old. I couldn't even see his body, he said seriously and angry, but sad at the end, while Chuck said nothing. Issei. I have no plans to get along with any of them, Chuck, whether in this life or the next, he said seriously, proceeding to calm down, since he didn't want to explode in front of everyone, much less return to a cell. Chuck. I understand, and excuse me, Issei, I will not bring up that subject again, he said with a somewhat sad tone. Chuck. The bill please, he said, drawing the attention of the waiter who served them before. Waiter. Right away, sir, he said, to which Chuck just nodded. However, Issei got up from his seat while taking out some bills. Issei. I'm leaving, Chuck, I'll pay for the pizza and drinks, he said while he was going to try to leave a reasonable amount to pay for everything. Chuck. There's no need to, he didn't finish speaking because the brown-haired boy interrupted him. Issei. It is, you paid my bail, and I know this is not enough to pay you all that money, but this is like a start to pay my debt. You can keep the change if there is any left, he said, leaving the money on the table and proceeding to leave. Issei. Goodbye, Chuck, and thanks for everything, he said in a somewhat grateful tone, saying goodbye to the man and then leaving the pizzeria. Once outside, Issei proceeded to go to his apartment until he remembered his motorcycle, which made him curse himself. But he made a mental note to retrieve it tomorrow at the headquarters, believing that it was there. After several minutes of walking, Issei arrived at his apartment and the first thing he did was take a good shower to take off his uniform, which had a little blood on it. When he finished this solo, he threw himself face down on his bed, then turned around and stared at the ceiling. Wondering why Chuck was so nice to him, enough to pay him an immense amount of money and invite him to dinner. She had even started to think of a way to not involve Chuck in her life, after all she didn't know him. Issei stopped thinking about that for the moment and proceeded to sleep, but in all the positions he lay down he couldn't do it, so he looked at his ceiling again without having any idea of what to do. Until he remembered that magic circle he had put on Akemi. He just sat on his bed forming a magic circle in his hand, creating the same map as the day before. However, that red dot was no longer there, he could not locate the position and the place where the Circuite was. So spreading the map on his bed and enlarging it, he proceeded to look for her in case she was in Kuo, but nothing. However, with a movement of the wrist the map changed location, now showing the underworld. Although some parts of the map were distorted, it was a sign that they were places that Issei had not explored. But that was not something that mattered to the brown-haired boy, and he only proceeded to look for that red dot until he managed to locate it and just focused more closely wanting to know where Akemi was. From the way he saw it, Akemi was in what seemed to be a very huge mansion, in short a castle. But in some parts of that castle it was distorted, a sign that he did not explore it completely, although some parts he did. Issei was trying to memorize where Akemi was until he could finally remember it. Akemi was in the Lucifer mansion, where Search's Gremory, the current Mao Lucifer, resides, along with his wife and Queen Peace Graphia Lucifuge. But despite the fact that they had a son, the brunette knew that their son resided in the Gremory clan mansion. But leaving that aside, the brunette focused on where Akemi was, realizing that he was in a very large room. Issei. They are in a meeting, he said seriously, knowing that that room was the meeting room of the allied factions. As he knew it was very easy, Issei had the few opportunities to participate in one or another meeting of the allied factions. One of those meetings was in the Lucifer mansion, in that same room. Even before and after the meeting, without anyone finding out, Issei managed to sneak past everyone present to get to know the Lucifer mansion. However, he only got to see a few places in the mansion, since sooner or later they would discover his absence, and the last thing he wanted was to be kicked out of the place. Luckily, he had managed to avoid one or two butlers and maids. But leaving that aside, Issei had received an expression full of disgust, while a great chill ran through his entire body. Issei. But I think it could be that too, he said with a tone of displeasure, while memories of Vietnam invaded his mind. Flashback. We can see an Issei dressed in a long-sleeved shirt, sports pants, also sports shoes all in black, in addition to wearing a mountain pass with which he covered his face, and a fanny pack hanging unadjusted on his chest. The brown-haired boy had entered the Lucifer mansion through a small tunnel that connected from the forest outside to the garden of said mansion. Besides, he didn't pay much attention to the barrier that was there after all, it carried magic runes that hid his presence and essence from everything and everyone, including the barrier. Issei. Without a doubt, these runes were worth every damn penny, he thought with some pleasure towards the runes he carried in his fanny pack. Issei. Well, time to look for those books, he thought, having the plan to borrow some magic books from the Crimson Mao's office. The brown-haired boy, with a stealth and care that was very scary, moved through the gardens of the Lucifer mansion, taking care not to be seen by anyone. Issei continued on his way until he reached a somewhat large double door, which he carefully opened and then entered the mansion. Issei. Okay, Phase 2 thought something serious only to take out a rune from his fanny pack. Issei hurriedly searched for the rune he needed, but every now and then he took a careful look to see if anyone was approaching his position. After a few seconds, he found the rune he wanted and then hit the rune against his chest in a quick and strong movement that elicited a moan of pain from him, which he had to contain. Issei. Son of a hitch, next time I'll buy something else so I don't do this again, he thought with a little pain, and then saw how his left arm became invisible. Minutes later, Issei had become completely invisible, but he knew he would have to hurry since the effect lasted a few minutes. At a hurried but also silent pace, he searched for the office of the Mao Lucifer, who from time to time created a map using his magic and was guided by it. After a few minutes and dodging the different servants that were in the mansion and having luck on his side, he managed to find the Mao's office, and without wasting time, he tried to open it, but it was locked, but that was not a problem, after all he carried a lockpick in his fanny pack in case it was necessary. After a couple of attempts, the brown-haired boy managed to open the door and then quickly entered and in a quick movement, created some magic circles, pointing to the corners of the room. Since he felt the presence of some magic circles in those places. The brown-haired boy only proceeded to close the door and lock it with a lock that was inside, although after having done that, the invisibility effect had ended up becoming visible again. But without wasting any time, Issei formed a magic circle from which a bag came out, placing it on the mass's desk, only to open it to reveal several adult magazines. Issei. Well, 10 minutes and 30 seconds starting from now, he thought seriously as he marked the timer on a watch he had on his left wrist, then quickly headed towards one of the shelves. In this bookshelf, Issei was grabbing book by book looking for the books to know magic spells, whether high level or even maybe forbidden. The books that were of no use to him he put back in the place and position they were in. But the ones that were useful, he kept inside another bag while he grabbed 3 adult magazines and used illusion magic on them, making them look the same as the books he grabbed. But in a small accident, a book had fallen out of his grasp, but this book, unlike the others, was sealed with different magic circles. With curiosity and interest, he put it in the bag with the other books. Well, he did the same procedure with the previous books, but putting some similar magic circles that the book he had grabbed had. The 10 minutes and 30 seconds were up, so he just put the bag of magic books and the adult magazines in a magic circle. The brunette opened his fanny pack again, taking out another invisibility rune, in addition to the lockpick. He hit another rune against his chest, earning another moan of pain, before opening the door and leaving, but not before deactivating the magic circles he made when entering the office. Once outside the Mao's workroom, Issei locked the door again with the lockpick and proceeded to leave the way he came, however. Issei. Oh, where did I come from? He thought, looking at both sides of the hallway without remembering where he came from. He brought up the map again, checking where he needed to go, but for some reason it started to fail. Issei. Don't come and fail me now. A few moments ago you were doing great, he thought with some annoyance, but the map kept failing only to make him disappear. Issei. Sigh. Well, I'll take care of that later, for now where should I go? He said, looking at both hallways, just to do it. Issei. It was a little fish, a little cockroach, a little mask, a puppet. It wasn't me, it was Teet. Hit him, who did it do it, he thought as he hurriedly moved his hand in both directions, then pointed towards the left hallway. Issei. Well, since he thought carefree going in that direction, without remembering that he had arrived through the right corridor. But that same hurried step but silence, Issei proceeded to look for the exit to leave the Lucifer mansion. However, after a few very minutes the brunette had disappeared, which made him nervous, since the invisibility effect was not going to last any longer. He made the same map as before again, which now worked. He only cursed the spell he created and then remained in disbelief. Since he was in a part he had not explored, making his heart rate start to accelerate, while his breathing became a little agitated. Issei. Calm down, Issei, no one has discovered you yet, so for now you will continue living, he thought as he calmed down, since getting nervous was not going to be of much help. Issei. For now I must move, time is running out, he thought, something serious and now calm, ready to leave the mansion. But when he was going to do it, he had managed to hear some strange sounds near or perhaps far from where he was. However, he turned his gaze trying to find where those sounds came from. Until he realized that in front of him, there was a large door to just get a little closer, listening to those strange sounds coming from inside that room, hall or whatever. He was going to ignore that and leave, but his curiosity was greater than his desire to leave, so he carefully and slowly opened the door. But the moment he did that, a terrible smell of fish and something else had filled his nose, but he didn't know what it was, although that was enough to make him want to cut off his nose and want to vomit. But he held it in just to hear how those sounds had become clear, being nothing more than the clash of skin against skin, while he heard the voices of several women, either moaning or saying things with a clear double meaning. The brown-haired boy only peeked out a little, only to be left in shock at seeing what was happening. He saw how a huge number of men and women were in the middle of an orgy. Issei didn't know what to say, at no time had he expected something like that, but in a few seconds he managed to see some acquaintances. Searches Gremory having hex with his wife, Azazel being with 2 fallen angels, even the seraphim themselves Michael, Uriel and Raphael were present. While in another place was the seraph Gabriel along with Irina and Zenobia being with some angels, while in another place were Yasaka, Kuroka and Kaneko having hex with some Yakase. But as if that were not enough, there were the girls from the Gremory and Citri entourage having hex with Kiba, Saji and Vali Lucifer himself. Although that was something the brown-haired boy could bear, what he least expected and could have endured was seeing his sisters, the same Mocha and Akemi having hex with some boys. That had made her close the door quickly, but everyone being busy doing their own thing, hadn't heard the door close. Then flashback. Issei quickly hit his head hard as he wanted to forget everything he had seen, but especially what happened with Akemi and Mocha. Hell, it is even one of the things that to this day has him traumatized after what happened with Mephistopheles and the Avenger, of course. Besides, that was the reason why he let his little friend shake at night. Note. You already know, shake the otter, raise the flag, load the shotgun, fire the mortar, polish the pedestal, something like that, end of note. Just like stopping watching adult things to just concentrate on his studies, as well as his career as a stunt motorcyclist. But when Akemi and Mocha were at the academy and he saw them, shit, at those moments he wished he was blind, because just seeing them made him remember what he saw in the Lucifer mansion. But now he remained sane about that, but still he couldn't help but feel disgust and dislike towards both of them. But even though he wouldn't shout it from the rooftops, he had a huge grudge against his mother and sisters, but at no time did he feel any kind of incestuous attraction towards any of the 3. Issei. I feel like shooting myself, my god, he said in a very annoyed tone and giving a deep sigh. Issei. Well, the only thing I hope is that they are not doing that, he said, seriously getting up from his bed and having in mind to return to the Lucifer mansion. Issei only proceeded to dress in the same way as the last time he entered the Lucifer mansion. Under his bed he took out a box with several magic runes, but he grabbed the ones he was going to need and use. Issei. How much I regret not having bought that, he said with a regretful tone when he saw the invisibility runes, remembering about an invisibility potion, but because of how expensive it was he didn't buy it, but now he was regretting not having done so. Issei. Sigh, what does it matter, what's done, is done. But now that I think about it better, these runes aren't that bad, he said with a small smile, since the invisibility runes lasted longer than that potion. Without saying anything else, he put the runes in the fanny pack that was in his closet, but just in case he also put the lockpick in his cell phone, but not before lowering the volume by putting it on vibrate mode in case he received a message, call or some kind of notification. Issei. Well, I'm completely ready, he said looking at himself in the mirror on the left door of his closet. He even opened his fanny pack to check if everything he needed was there, noticing that everything he had put in was there, so he just closed his fanny pack. Without any hesitation, Issei created a magic circle heading towards the underworld, more specifically a place near the Lucifer mansion. After a few moments, Issei left his apartment. However, the brown-haired boy had forgotten something, and it was a leather garment that was on a chair in a dark corner. It was the clothes that the Avenger had taken from Gressel, the demon of the earth, but as if that were not enough. There were only a few hours left before the Avenger woke up. Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.